The program will begin in 10 minutes. Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin.
Reaching net zero carbon emissions is crucial to fight climate change. We'll be a net zero company by 2025, and we're enabling the world to follow our lead, helping build a global alliance committed to net zero, giving businesses the data and insights they need to act, and leading the charge to end coal power and move the world to a clean energy economy. Acting together, we can tackle the climate crisis.
Please welcome to the stage Meg Szabo, Senior Editor for Bloomberg Green and Sustainability Events.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Bloomberg Green Summit. We are so excited to have you here, whether you're joining us virtually or here in the room in New York. Today, we're really trying to focus on solutions, whether it be the first city working to decarbonize all of their buildings, or an electric plane company, or an Earthshot Prize winner, or a Oscar-nominated writer. We have it all today from the change makers that are leading the charge to lead us to a greener future. But before we get started, a couple of quick announcements. First, I would like to thank our premier partners, GM, Wholesome, and JLL. Our presenting sponsors, iShares, Paper and Packaging Board, and Zurich, Zurich Insurance Group. For our virtual attendees, if you experience any issues with audio or video quality, just try to refresh your browser or use that chat box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen for support. We would love to hear from you throughout the day. To submit questions virtually, you can click on the white tab on the right-hand side of the screen. And for the in-person audience, you can use that QR code on your badge, and the Wi-Fi information's on there as well. You can also engage with us on social media today using the hashtag #BloombergGreen. And with that, we can get started. I'd like to welcome to the stage Aaron Rutkoff, who is Executive Editor of Bloomberg Green, to get us started today. Aaron, welcome. So today we really tried to highlight a lot of the great reporting you're doing at Bloomberg Green throughout the day. What are you most excited to see?
Well, I mean, it's just so cool for the second time, only since Green launched, to be sharing a real world space with people and getting to have our journalists and so many of the people that we interview in our stories here with us to kind of bring the journalism that we do to life. I'm really excited to see Akshat Rathi, who's our senior climate reporter, interviewing the CEO of QuantumScape. As most of you probably know, it's just a super fascinating solid state battery startup whose work, like many battery startups, is very secretive. The last time the CEO of QuantumScape joined us at a live event and Akshat interviewed him, it moved markets. So it's always just fascinating to see what happens when the two of them get together. We're also going to have a conversation between our US climate reporter, Leslie Kaufman, and Google's Rebecca Moore. And she's profiled Google extensively. And Bloomberg Green is just fascinated by companies that are trying to go carbon negative, as Google's trying to do. There's likewise going to be a conversation with the sustainability executive from Stripe, which is another company that's trying to go carbon negative and doing really interesting things in the carbon removal space. I'm also really looking forward to having Danielle Bachove, who's part of the Bloomberg team that covers the Canadian Arctic. She's going to be sharing the stage virtually with some indigenous scientists who are going to be joining us live from the Arctic. We've just done this big examination of new contributions being made by these communities living in the Arctic as it changes to climate science. And so it's just a really fascinating way to look at some of the frontiers of science. Also, it's just going to be a real treat to have Eric Roston, who's one of the most experienced climate science journalists out there, interviewing someone who wrote a movie about people ignoring climate science journalists, basically. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then, just to talk about some work that we've been doing just today, while we were all coming here to gather in this space or joining us online, our team published this examination of President Biden's climate ambitions 1 year later. It was a rather tough piece to put together because what we were really assessing was the limits to what the US government has been able to achieve 1 year after the president came into office, really for the first time ever, with goals that could be measured in metric tons of emissions that we wanted to remove from the atmosphere in the future. And we, in this story, really talked to some of the climate modelers who were assessing Build Back Better and some of the other moves by Biden to try to reduce emissions. And it's a story about what little has been achieved. And I know today we're going to get to have a conversation with one of Biden's climate advisors. So I'm really excited to see the work we were doing this morning kind of brought here.
That's amazing. And that is a great segue. So our first interview of the day will be a virtual interview with White House climate advisor Gina McCarthy with Francine Lacroix for a live taping of her Leaders with Lacroix Goes Green series. But before we get into that, please enjoy this Zurich sponsor spotlight, the sum of all actions.
Zurich is mobilizing for climate action through the Zurich Forest Project to restore a portion of Brazil's Atlantic forest to its natural state in partnership with the local non-profit Instituto Terra. Each Zurich employee worldwide is gifted one tree.
That tree is a call for action to each one as an individual to continue doing what the planet is asking for.
The restored forest will be self-sustaining and biodiverse. Join us as the journey continues. We all have a role to play in protecting our planet for future generations. Whether our contribution is large or small, it's a choice we make every day.
I pledge to reduce waste,
to move to a more plant-based diet.
I pledge to use less plastic and start recycling more.
Curbing climate change is the greatest challenge of our time, and it will take all of us to stop it. At Zurich, we believe individual contributions can add up to something much bigger. That's why we want to inspire and empower our customers, employees, and our communities to take action with us. Because together, we achieve more.
A company like us has to act, has to do real things. The climate can be improved if we all start doing the things that we can and we want to do.
Tackling climate change needs allies. Zurich is mobilizing for climate action through the Zurich Forest Project, launched in Brazil in 2020. We have partnered with photographer Sebastião Salgado and his wife Lélia, founders of non-profit Instituto Terra, to help restore a portion of Brazil's Atlantic forest to its natural state.
We must come back to our planet. If you want to survive as a species, we must come back to the planet. We must rebuild parts of the planet that we destroyed.
The Zurich Forest Project aims to reverse the damage inflicted by decades of cattle farming and logging. It helps to make environmental topics like nature restoration and biodiversity more tangible. A forest, Salgado says, is not a single being. It's built over many years, tree by tree. A tree is a shelter for other creatures. It holds the soil together and catches rainwater. It's perfectly attuned to the seasons.
The environment, the biodiversity is local. We are planting a forest in Brazil. We are using local species because the biodiversity, the ants, the termites, these insects, these snakes, the birds, they love only the essence of the region. We must replant the forest. We must rebuild part what we destroy.
We decided to give a tree to every employee to make everybody aware that they have a role, that they have something that they have to do themselves, that their commitment is important. That tree is a call for action to each one as an individual to continue doing what the planet is asking for.
At Zurich, we want our work to inspire people to take a stand for nature. Our new global headquarters in Switzerland is one of the most sustainable buildings in the world. And we aim to implement a sustainable buildings program in an additional 50 offices. We've set ambitious carbon emissions targets for our investment portfolio while also curbing emissions related to underwriting. Our global operations have been carbon neutral since 2014, and we aim to achieve net zero emissions by the end of this decade. We're cutting air travel-related emissions by 70%. We've cut paper consumption, eliminated single-use plastic, and we're turning our car fleet into 100% electric vehicles, and we're committed to using only renewable power worldwide by the end of 2022.
This is the beginning of a long wave of actions to make the planet sustainable. The others also will take their actions and initiatives. And if all of us on the planet do our contribution, we can save it.
Please welcome to the virtual stage White House climate advisor Gina McCarthy for a conversation with Bloomberg Television's Francine Lacroix.
Gina, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to talk to you for the special episode of Leaders Go Green. Now, after this conversation, we're also going to transform it into a 30-minute TV show so people can watch it again if they wish so. Let me start right off with, the million-dollar question, Gina. Does the war in Ukraine and the world, most of the world, trying to reduce its dependency on Russian oil and gas mean that climate goals will actually be delayed?
Well, I think the president made very clear here that there's two issues that we have to face. Our immediate emergency with Ukraine, which has caused some escalation in the price of gas and oil. And so we really have to address that challenge, at least for the American people who are struggling with those price increases. But at the same time, the president has made it enormously clear that he views the issue of climate change as a significant existential challenge. And his belief is, and he stated it every single time that he's talked about oil and gas prices, is that our only way to have independence, our only way to have security against challenges that dictators like Putin present is to actually grab that clean energy future. That is the only way we're going to make this work. So yes, we have to address the challenge. Yes, the challenge in Ukraine is enormous, but it is a great example of the fact of the instability that can happen when you rely on fossil fuels as your path to the future. It was once, it is no more. Our path now has to be clean energy that we can own, that we can deliver, that will be secure in the future for the American public. That's what the president is all in terms of his efforts to address this challenge.
In the medium term or in the shorter term, and this is a problem of timeline, will they, though, be suspended? If the president asks oil producers to pump more oil, realistically, what does it mean for climate goals in the next 12 months and 24 months?
Well, we haven't slowed down in terms of taking every step that we can. The president set some very aggressive targets. We're not going to use this to slow down our ability to address that. Last year alone, we had the biggest year ever on wind and solar and battery storage. We have 56 million homes that are powered with clean energy. We have a bipartisan infrastructure law that is all about investing $1.2 trillion in that clean energy future. And so we don't think we should stop. We don't think we should slow down. The challenge for us is to recognize that these world challenges will arise, but every country needs to keep its sight on where it's heading. And the United States of America is doing that. We continue to plow forward with a whole of government approach. We are continuing to actually restore environmental safeguards and climate safeguards that the prior administration put aside. And we're going to keep doing that. I don't think we should use this current situation as anything other than a wake-up call that we need to focus more and more on the development of clean energy in the United States and across the world.
But will the transition take longer or be more difficult? So you're increasing domestic oil and gas production, sticking with your stated climate goals. So do you need better technology to then, continue the transition much quicker? Or what does it give us in terms of time?
Yeah. Well, the effort that we're focusing on in Ukraine is the effort to get more natural gas, LNG, out to Europe and other countries that need it, our allies. And that can be done with already existing in place platforms that are active and moving forward. So we have not expanded new entrees into this system as opposed to focus on where we move forward and how we support our allies during this crisis. So I don't think this needs to be a step back or a pause or a delay. In fact, we're continuing with our goal of achieving 50% reductions by 2030 in many of our sectors moving forward. And we're actually having some great success. We're having great success in offshore wind, where we now actually have a vibrant opportunity ahead of us with permits issued and moving forward. Offshore leases, the most recent one in New York and New Jersey coast actually accrued more than $4 billion. This is serious efforts moving forward. On our public lands, we've increased our renewable energy by 36%. We know what we have to do. We're staying focused. You know, the EV challenge that we thought would be so difficult to move forward on, and we had to push with those car sectors, actually proved to be the best opportunity ever to actually strengthen and get the strongest energy efficiency standards for vehicles ever. We now have $100 billion in investments from car companies in manufacturing in the U.S. again. So we are looking at every sector as opportunities to actually do a couple of things, Francine. One is to create new jobs, really good paying union jobs where we can get them. We're looking at making sure we focus on environmental justice in those communities that haven't been invested in. And you'll see that with every expense investment that we're making from the bipartisan infrastructure law and across the agencies. And we want to make sure that we're focused on actually moving forward with people understanding that these are huge opportunities for us to actually make a healthy communities for them, to actually have energy efficient homes, cities that work for them, transportation systems that can deliver clean air. And so we're hoping that the United States will really focus on what's right for people today, that actually is building the platform for clean energy moving forward. It's no longer about sacrifice, Francine. There's too much good stuff out there, new technologies, opportunities, and we're going to invigorate people. We're going to give them hope again. We're going to move this forward in a way that will really produce benefits for our families. Consumers will save money every step of the way.
And Gina, I know you're saying you've achieved a lot, and certainly there was a lot of promises at the beginning. You have so much drive and energy, and I always hear the fact that, you know, Gina McCarthy is one of the people that's really trying to do a lot of change. But can the Biden administration still achieve the commitment to cut emissions 50% by 2030 without the $555 billion in climate spending contained in the stalled Build Back Better Act?
Well, Francine, you're right. The president is looking not just at what we can do, but he's looking to push Congress to actually go that next step. We actually do need investments in tax credits. We do need investments in consumers, for example, those that are buying EVs, because we want every community and every individual family to be able to afford these types of vehicles and good homes and clean cities moving forward. So the bipartisan infrastructure law has given us a tremendous boost. So it's not like we're slowing down or we've slowed down, because we haven't. We are still making huge progress, even in the manufacturing sector, which is so important for us to restore. But we need more from Congress. Do we need $550 billion? Maybe not. Do we need some core tax credits and some core consumer credits for the American people to be able to succeed? We do need those, and we expect to be able to achieve them. Those conversations are continuing, Francine. I wish we already had it over the finish line, but we will get there because it's the best thing to do for the American people. And if folks in Congress are there to serve them, this is what will come out of it.
This is a huge deal, right? The White House had estimated that the stalled Build Back Better Act would have cut U.S. emissions by a gigaton. What is the current status of negotiations on the next version of that bill with Congress? What are you expecting?
Well, we're certainly expecting, and we see that Congress has a number of bills out there that will really be magnificent boosts forward. You know, we have solar bills that are really going to be crucial to continue to advance solar, which, as we all know, is such a winning, inexpensive technology. But we need to make it easier and more plentiful for everybody. And we're working on that, Francine. One of the things that we've realized is that every action we take, we want to make that action be sustainable. You know, we learned from the prior administration that some actions that they took were so easy to undo that we had to make sure we did better. And so part of this is not just to look at Congress to move forward with these key investments for us moving forward, but also we want to make sure that we're working in government to actually change the system. You know, Francine, for too long, climate change was looked at as an issue that was an environmental issue, had to be EPA's, or it's about the Department of the Interior. We're no longer looking at that. We're building systems to actually get our finance systems to actually look at and require businesses to look at what their investments are and what they mean for climate. We are looking to build in systems in our own federal government where our buildings are 100% clean energy in a very short period of time. We're looking at all our vehicles to turn to EVs. We're looking at our ability to actually, and we've set standards for what is the carbon impact from asphalt and cement used in our bipartisan infrastructure investments so that they can be resilient and low carbon, the lowest we can get. So we're looking at every opportunity, not just in Congress, Francine, but we need to build climate into the very ether of how government works at the federal level in concert with local communities, with our tribal communities, our environmental justice communities. So that it's built into the system in a way that's much more durable than ever before. And that's what my office is orchestrating. We do everything across agencies. We do nothing that's individual because we know that this is a multifaceted challenge. And climate change impacts everything we do, and we need to take action in every place that's possible to actually advance our clean energy future.
But are you frustrated by the slow pace this is taking? I mean, I know if we go back to Congress, you know, Senator Joe Manchin has indicated he wants the next iteration of the BBB Act to feature provisions to expand domestic fossil fuel production. Is this not frustrating for someone like you who wants things done and done now to make sure that we reach those goals?
Well, you know, I have to say, Francine, that I'm probably one of the most obnoxious human beings in terms of I want everything and I want it now. In many ways, I'm like my grandchildren that I try to teach them a little patience, and that doesn't work because I'm talking out of the other side of my mouth, Francine. Of course, I want it to be done now, but I've also worked in government for like 40 years. I get that it takes time, and I don't think we've lost anything so far because we have moved forward on this irreversible path to clean energy. We have set tough standards. We're meeting those standards. When we left Glasgow, we immediately took on HFCs and methane. The president just announced a forestry executive order that he unveiled yesterday that's going to be making sure that we're involved in getting rid of this deforestation, this illegal deforestation that we've been seeing. So we're not losing any step in terms of our ability to take action. In fact, we've really moved forward in a way that's quite historic. That in the bipartisan infrastructure law, that's $1.2 trillion. We've already put out $45 billion. That's going to get us everything from work on environmental justice challenges with clean water, with reducing pollution, with electric vehicle charging stations, 500,000 of them. We've attracted new EV manufacturing dollars. So we're not losing steps, but we need to get more action on the Hill. So there's no question that it has to happen, and there's no question that we have to push for it. The only question is when. And I think we're not frustrated by any of these conversations. We're still busy, we're working, we're getting stuff done, but we do need to have this wrapped up, and hopefully soon, so that the American people can see that not just this administration, but Congress is all in on this effort, because they understand that these challenges can't wait.
We're about 6 months away from midterm elections, Gina, that could also change the congressional landscape and could actually change what could be achieved on climate legislatively. So how do you view a possible carbon tax and border adjustment taxes?
Yeah, well, we've been working very creatively on this, Francine, because, obviously there are folks on the Hill who are looking at carbon taxes and other ways to put a price on carbon. We are actively making sure that we're investing in that shift to clean energy, because that shift will allow consumers to save money, more jobs to grow, investments in environmental justice communities. So there's yin and yang in all of these various challenges and initiatives moving forward. But the most important thing for the president is to make sure that everything is on the table. Congress gets to do business. But in this administration, we are going to focus on actually making investments that matter, investments that will build this clean energy future. And so we're open to a lot of things. One of the most exciting areas we have is in our industrial sector, in our manufacturing sector. We have been working with the EU to develop an international agreement where we look at carbon content of cement and asphalt and aluminum, all of the various ways in which we can work internationally to actually reduce carbon emissions and make the countries that have the cleanest, the ones that actually have those arrangements and win in those arrangements. So there's ways in which we're thinking about these challenges very differently, like with CBMs, which I just explained.
So what would it take, this is the toughest question I'm going to ask you maybe, what would it take for the administration to support a carbon tax?
The administration hasn't been opposed to a carbon tax, but a carbon tax requires congressional action. And if I may say that, I'm not sure that carbon taxes are always the most efficient mechanism in every sector. And so we want to make sure that we're not adding burden on consumers without providing those reductions in greenhouse gases. So we've seen the EU and others have carbon taxes. That's a great approach for them. The question is, has it resulted in significant reductions as much as the investment strategies that we're already doing domestically and that Congress is considering? So it's on the table. It requires congressional action. If that's the choice of Congress, we'll certainly go all in. But in the meantime, it doesn't mean our hands are tied. It just means we have other opportunities, like actually getting domestic offshore wind industry rolling forward, which is really going at a pace that's incredible. We have 100 new actions on energy efficiency for homes. We have actually state and local governments working with us on building sector so that we can start making sure that we're building homes for the future as well as today. So we're going to keep moving forward and not take any of these issues off the table. And in fact, recognize that, the innovation that we're seeing today is actually quite remarkable. You could see it in the electric vehicles that we thought would be a struggle. And it was automakers and auto workers joining hand in hand and spending money, investing in that future. But I do think there's a lot more that we can do domestically to actually set the pace. But we're not taking anything off the table. In fact, we're looking for every new creative opportunity we can find.
So let me talk about technology in a second, but I also want to ask you about solar. The U.S. solar industry is warning of widespread disruptions, canceled projects, delayed deployments because of the tariff circumvention probe at the Commerce Department. They're actually worried about, of course, how much solar they can deliver in terms of energy. Are you worried?
Well, last year we had another banner year, and we're going to do everything we can to work through these issues with the solar sector. There's no question that the investigation has slowed down our ability to get panels into the U.S. The president is aware of that. We're looking at every opportunity we can to make sure that we're both, taking the action we need on forced labor, but we're doing it in a way that allows our solar sector to continue to move forward. Francine, one of the key issues is that the U.S. has lost manufacturing jobs. We actually lost our domestic solar manufacturing capability over the time of the last administration. We need to build that back. So part of the challenge is we need to start investing in our manufacturing sector again. And one of those key sectors are in solar. We simply need to start making solar here in the United States. And we're working with the sector. Well, the solar companies recognize that there's a challenge. They certainly don't want to have any kind of a negative impact on our efforts to address forced labor. But they also know that they have to step up, and we all have to start investing together in building that supply chain here in the United States.
Jan, what are you most excited about technology? Is there a piece of technology that when we get that, actually it will be adapting renewable energies much quicker? Is there something in the next 2 years that you can't wait to see?
Well, there are so many. Francine, I don't know if you've ever met Secretary Jennifer Granholm from our Department of Energy, but if there's anybody that has more energy than that woman, I've never met them because she's just amazing. And I think we have these energy earth shots on clean hydrogen, green hydrogen. That is an amazing opportunity especially in our industrial area. We have to make sure that our industries can get clean. Energy storage is a big deal. We're looking at the development of critical minerals that are going to be essential for battery technology. So we're looking at now even a sustainable aviation grand challenge we have moving forward. We had our first commercial airline flight that was actually powered by biofuels. We're looking at fusion technology. We just had a White House summit on that. We're looking at both the current domestic fleet of nuclear, but also on how we look at these new smaller units. And people are actually investing in these in ways that I think just tell us that innovation has moved at an incredible pace in the United States for a long time and elsewhere. If we focus our attention on some key areas that are now difficult for us, and we move forward and embrace those with the kind of resources that we actually have available now that the bipartisan infrastructure law gave us, we are going to see technology really escalate in a way that's going to allow us opportunities that, again, don't require a burden on consumers, but actually give them tremendous benefits and grow industries again. We need things made in America. We need our own labor. To move forward, we need to build back our country from the bottom up and the middle out. And that's what this is all about. This is not just a climate strategy. This is a climate strategy embedded in an economic strategy that will allow the U.S. to win the 21st century clean energy economy.
Gina, there are rumors that you might want to step down. I'm not going to ask you about that directly, but you've had a hard job. You've been working at this for more than a year. You've made significant initial progress on auto emissions, on HFCs, on methane. You also have quite a lot of work left to do, including getting climate legislation, this critical clean energy tax incentives through Capitol Hill. What do you think you need to accomplish before you'll feel okay handing off the work?
Oh, Lord, I'll probably never feel okay because it ain't done yet. But as you can see, I remain so youthful. I'm just going to keep moving forward. I know that as time goes on, so do my wrinkles increase, but it hasn't really impacted me in terms of my hope, my energy level. I think we are on the cusp of, as we just talked about, innovations that are available to us today and in the immediate future. We just have to keep working on them. So no, I'm not going anywhere fast. But I realize that, like everybody else, I'm time limited, and I'll give it my best while I'm here, and I'll keep trying to get some big things over the finish line. And we'll see where all of this heads, but I'm pretty excited about what I'm seeing so far.
You're one of the real leaders when it comes to tackling climate change. What drives you? How do you measure success?
I measure success, I think, by, how people feel about whether they think that a lot of my effort has been government service. I want people to feel like that government is working for them. One of the best things about the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is really quite transformative, is that it gives us an ability in communities to show that we're investing in them again. It gives us an ability to reach out to environmental justice communities and our tribal leaders in ways that we've never been able to actually effectively create the kind of partnerships that are going to matter. There is a tremendous ability now, I think, to restore government's leadership role and to do that in a way that works with our state and local communities. Because for too long, our state and local communities have been the only game in town. During the prior administration, they tried to hold the line. I don't want that to be the tone or tenor anymore. Success needs to be, I'm grabbing that future. Success needs to be, we can win this battle. And while we're doing that, we're going to lift the very individuals that have always been overburdened by pollution, over-challenged by lack of investment, and figure out how we can grow the strongest democracy that we can by giving voice to the people. And, I'm just a consummate public servant. It's what I've always done. It's what I've always loved to do, and I'll keep doing it for a while.
Do you still come across climate deniers, Gina, and how do you speak to them? How do you talk to them? Do you engage?
Say that again?
Do you still come across climate deniers, climate change deniers?
Yeah.
How do you engage with them?
Maybe they just avoid me, which is probably good, because I might do that myself in the other direction. But I'm not coming across a lot of folks that are denying climate. One of the best parts of translating this clean energy challenge into opportunities for jobs, environmental justice communities, and one of the biggest ways in which we can actually make progress is to make sure that we're not fighting over the problem. We're actually pushing forward solutions that are better for everyone. I think that's the key. And that's why the framing of President Biden, who is really a people person, that's what he thinks of. The framing of this being better today as well as tomorrow just makes that discussion of climate denial insignificant. And frankly, we are already seeing another wildfire season started up. We're already looking at droughts that have continued to persist for years. We are looking at challenges with heat where we lost thousands of lives. We are talking about that in the Pacific Northwest. This is not the kind of challenge that I think any of us can ignore. So climate denial was a strategy before. It can't be anymore. And saying that we can't afford to actually invest in a clean energy future is no longer a viable tenet for anybody to suggest. We are getting beaten to a pulp by billions of dollars in expenses every year in the challenges that we face. We need to build a resilient infrastructure. We have resources to make huge progress on that now. We're going to show people that we are embracing this climate challenge, and we're going to turn it into every single opportunity we can for them today to feel good about where they live, what we're doing, how we're thinking about their lives and their children's future. And that's how we're going to win this.
Gina, thank you so much for your time today. Gina McCarthy, everyone.
Thanks, Francine. Great to be here. Thanks, Bloomberg.
Please welcome to the stage Daily Harvest's CEO Rachel Drori and Chief Supply Chain Officer Ricky Silver for a conversation with Bloomberg's Carol Masser.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Rachel, Ricky, it's so good to have both of you here. I thought coming off of Gina, I wanted to ask you, because the last question that Francine asked her was about climate deniers. So you guys work with farmers directly in the production of organic food. What are you hearing from farmers?
Yeah, so
how bad is the environment?
Yeah, we speak with a lot of farmers, and quite frankly, they've been talking about this for decades, right? The changes in the soil, the changes in the climate. They're less worried about the political realities of climate change. They're more worried about the direct impact that it has on them year to year, right? Agriculture is an investment up front that farmers make in their land, and they rely on markets at the end of the day to be able to procure that investment. And so what happens often year to year is that variability, that lack of output because of some of the climate issues that they're seeing directly impact their ability to continue to invest. And it puts a lot of fear and a doubt in whether or not the agricultural space is something that they can continue in generation to generation.
A lot of economic pressure.
They're not denying it.
No, not at all.
So, all right. And Gina just talked a lot about what the government is trying to do, Build Back Better, in terms of climate legislation and spending. What do you think, Rachel, that the government could do that really would help your space, the organic space, the farming space?
Yeah. There's so many things, because ultimately people can vote with their dollars. People can put their their money where their mouth is. But these problems have to be solved at the corporate and systemic level. There's so much research that needs to be done on regenerative agriculture, on agriculture and climate change that the government needs to invest in. And I think about farm subsidies where soy, wheat, corn are where the government is still putting their money after all these years, and the downstream effects of those investments, where if we took that money and put it towards investment and research in regenerative agriculture, we would be in a whole different place.
I'd also love to say there's some basic oversight and sort of action of the systems within government that we can push for. So, for example, we were down in Organic Week a couple weeks back, and there's a bill that right now is being pushed called the Continuous Improvement and Accountability Act for Organic, that would basically just ensure a 20-year backlog of recommendations and changes to how organic is managed and overseen go into effect, or at least get reviewed. And that type of a backlog is exactly why I think the farming community, the ag space, hasn't been able to make more progress, because government isn't stepping up and even doing the fundamentals, let alone the investments that Rachel's talking about.
So you're saying there's a backlog of farmers who want to produce organically, and they just need to be signed off on and approved?
More so the oversight of the organic certification process, something that means a lot to consumers, right? You need to have trust in that. So there's a backlog of recommendations that would make the oversight and the process of becoming organic certified or maintaining it.
This is the Green Summit, right? And
yes.
So we're thinking about things that impact the environment. Why is organic farming, why is regenerative farming, which is what you guys are focusing on, why is this so important? And part of understanding this is understanding exactly what regenerative farming is about versus conventional farming.
Absolutely. I mean, regenerative agriculture, just to level set, is bringing our soil back to a place where, Mother Nature can do what Mother Nature does.
Right.
It takes a lot of hubris for us as a society to say, like, oh, we can do better than Mother Nature. We can, use, fungicides and pesticides and fertilizers to do something better. So it's kind of bringing agriculture, bringing our soil back to a place where it can sustain human life on this planet for future generations.
Yeah, I would just say the other thing that's really important to know is that this is not new, right? Regenerative agriculture is certainly—
Isn't it kind of what farmers did way
back when? Yeah, and it's about a holistic approach to, as Rachel said, both soil management and the farm management, right? The people on the land as well.
Can we scale it up? I mean, just looking at some of the statistics in terms of agriculture and what it, the contribution to the economy, but so much is done conventionally. Can we scale it up?
Yes, I think there's a big misnomer that says, organic agriculture and regenerative agriculture can't be scaled. But the truth is, many farmers are doing this already.
Yeah.
And so it's not to say that it can't be scaled, but
why aren't more then?
Because
organic is, what was the statistic you shared with me?
So food that we eat is 1% of U.S. agriculture, and only 1% of that is organic.
So a really small amount. So why aren't more doing it?
It's expensive and unproven. And so you think about what the farming community is looking for, right? We do go out of our way to make sure we listen first. right? We're not going to tell people what they should do. We're going to listen. And what's amazing to see is in a more regional, local way, there are farmers that are building community around applying these regenerative practices and proving to themselves that it makes a difference, right? And so how do you go to a farming community that is, razor thin margins already and say, we need you to spend more to invest? This might take 5-10 years to, get to the outputs you need. That's where businesses and government need to step in and incentivize that transition.
And that's really where we play a role, right? So we have a belief that if everybody eats more fruits and vegetables every single day, that this is something that is objectively good for humans and objectively good for the planet. But not all fruits and vegetables are grown the same way. And they have to be grown in a way that gives back to the soil, that puts us all in a better position. So giving those farmers a hand and saying that we will help support you through the 3-year transition from conventional to organic, which comprises of a bunch of different processes that I won't go into, but
it's 3 years.
It's a 3-year process.
And what's the cost? Because you said it's expensive. Do we have
it? Depends on the commodity. It depends on the region, but it is definitely higher cost, and that's where there is generally a premium on organic agriculture on the end result. But for a farmer who's making that transition, for that 3 years, they're farming organically. The food is organic, and yet they're unable to sell at that premium. And so what we're doing, and we're testing out this model and scaling it, is stepping in and actually paying a premium on the transitional product even during that process and giving them that extra oomph to say, we're here for you, we got you.
All right, so I jumped in the middle. So this is Daily Harvest.
Hi.
So if you're not familiar, Rachel, tell us about your backstory and what you guys are doing and why you got into this 5 years ago.
Yeah. At Daily Harvest, we really believe that we need to remove the friction between the intent of eating more fruits and vegetables every day and actually doing it for the benefit of people and planet. And as I said, all fruits and vegetables are not grown the same way. So we really invest at the farmer level directly with them, thinking about farmer livelihoods, thinking about regenerative agriculture, thinking about education, thinking about research, with a series of different models that we're hoping we can prove work at scale, and making it so easy from a consumer perspective to then consume those fruits and vegetables. So Daily Harvest delivers frozen, organic, ready to eat meals across 11 different collections and eating occasions directly to your door, and everything is ready to prep in minutes. And that is, one of the major barriers. People don't know what tastes good. People don't know how to make them. You've got produce rotting in your refrigerator. There's so many consumer challenges as well. So we really think about how do we kind of create a new system that works better and solves for people and planet.
One of the really cool things about the way we're set up as well is Rachel challenged us as a team many years ago to build the supply chain that could support that nimbleness.
Right.
And so, we talk a lot about the agricultural side, but we've also developed a culinary approach that allows us to actually go to farmers and ask them what they want to grow. Right, so the normal model of R&D where you develop something in a lab, your procurement function goes out and then tries to purchase those ingredients with a specific specification. We've really flipped that model on its head and said, okay, what are the types of biodiverse, a range of different agricultural commodities that we want to incorporate, and then our culinary team does the work.
But
they
Rick,
transform that.
What if a farmer says, I don't know, pick a vegetable. Is there a vegetable somebody hates? What? Okra. Sorry.
Brussels sprouts is a good example. People love Brussels sprouts.
I love Brussels sprouts. But so what if the farmer's like, I want to do this. And you go back to your team and your chefs and they're like, you put stuff out on the platform and nobody buys it.
Yeah.
So how do you?
So therein lies our entire business model's secret sauce.
Yeah.
So we make our food with the people who eat it and the people who grow it. So what we've done is we use machine learning to really understand at an intimate level what customers want to eat, because taste is one of the main barriers between the intent and action of eating more fruits and vegetables every day. Not everyone wants to eat their broccoli or their lima beans or their okra, and that's okay. So we try to remove the barrier of taste first, and we make food for individuals and not averages. And then—
Wait, so how do you do that and be profitable and grow your business?
Yeah.
That sounds expensive.
So it comes down to variety. We have a ton of variety, and it comes down to agility.
Yeah.
So the other part of it is we make our food with people who grow it. So we go with our farmers. Ricky's entire team is building these really strong relationships with farmers who are looking into things like, how do I make money from a cover crop, which is a part of regenerative agriculture. So one of the principles of regenerative agriculture is making sure that the soil is not exposed. So a lot of farms spend most of the year exposed to the elements. So it's making use of that soil for other times a year, which adds to the microbiome of that soil in really substantive ways. So we make our food.
So it's giving back.
It gives back to the soil. And doesn't erode all of the carbon holding top layer of our soil, which is, a third of the carbon in our environment comes from agriculture.
I think it's worth stating, because I think it seems obvious, but it may not be, that the reason we use so many chemicals in conventional farming is because those chemicals, those nutrients, don't exist in the soil today. And so we're putting more and more and more chemical nutrients into the system, putting more and more chemical pesticides into the system to weed off these, other things that are growing. And in reality, that's the way the soil normally works, right? It normally works in a more, complex system.
What's it like coming up against the big ag system, the existing infrastructure? And part of ag is also the chemical industry, right? That's so involved in terms of fertilizer and so on. You and I, the three of us, have been talking a lot about Elon Musk. Like him or not, he's in the news a lot, always is. But what's interesting is he really poked the bear when it came to electric vehicles. And everybody was writing him off. But look at what he has done in upending the production of electric vehicles, whether it's GM, whether it's Ford, pick your automaker. But what's it like for you guys, who are a small player, coming up against the existing farming system and structure?
It's really tough. I think the stat is 95% of our food comes from 10 companies, which is
And are they taking your phone call? But I'm wondering how much you have to be involved with someone like that to help move the needle.
I think
and then help the environment.
This is where our long-term view comes in, and I think this is where the partnerships we're building on the ground come in. We just announced last week a 5-year partnership with our almond supplier and a number of other brands, investing in a 5-year study that's applying different regenerative practices to the land and actually validating the impact that it has. And so when you talk about coming up against big ag, what we're doing is we're building the data, and we're building the partnerships, and we're building the credibility to actually say, hey, there is a better way, right? Just screaming there's a better way without anything to back it up doesn't get you very far. And so I think, similar to the example you gave with Elon, there's some prove it, and then, build it, they will come, maybe, so, a little bit like there. So I think that's what we're looking to do.
And if we can show that it works, big food's gonna pay attention.
So another flip side of that is ESG, right? Like, there's been so much investor money. You guys all know the numbers. Like, everybody wants it, so many investors, and yet we're going through this moment in time where people want transparency and clarity about, when I make an ESG investment, wait, I'm in Exxon or I'm in whatever.
Right.
Forgive me, Exxon, I'm just singling it out. But how can that investor money, and talk to us about your investors, like what they want in terms of clarity, transparency. Are you saying, you've been doing this for 5 years, are they requiring more out of you to know that this really is kind of a clean, green investment?
Yeah, it all starts with value-aligned investors. You can't do much without that.
Would you not take an investor that isn't aligned with what you
No, I've turned down a lot of checks, which as a startup founder is not an easy thing to do. But we've turned away a lot of money. And it really is about our long view, right? The VC model is set up for quick returns, explosive growth, quick returns. And we have a really long-term approach to what we're doing, and the investments that we're making will not pay off immediately. Yes, we have amazing growth, which shows that there's demand from consumers, but really thinking about, how do we rewrite the system? How do we show that there's a different way? That's the long game. And when you think about a lot of public companies in the food space, again, those 10, and you think about how the street is rewarding them for paying out dividends, margin accretion, it's very hard to not greenwash and to not health wash and to make big change that's going to have an impact.
Well,
Totally agree.
well, let me just follow Rachel, because I think you guys hit unicorn status.
Yeah.
One of our reporters, Jillian Tan, wrote about it late last year with another round, a funding round. I am curious, does it make you want to stay private for longer?
Yeah.
Because it does give you that luxury of kind of doing what you want to do that 5-year research that you might not have as a public company.
It absolutely does. And we've always been focused on capital efficiency, which is also helpful in that environment. It allows you to stay private longer, and it allows you to roll up your sleeves and do the work that needs to be done to show that there's a different way.
So tell us about your platform, who's using it? Because it's great to hear what you guys are doing, but accessibility and getting it out to more people. So tell us about who uses your platform.
Yeah, so people are often surprised to hear that our population of consumers or customers actually track the U.S. population within 1 percentage point on almost all demographic cuts, which is pretty wild. So think
age, diversity, and whichever way you cut it.
All of it. Urbanacity, like people will, we're in New York. A lot of people will say like, oh yeah, it's a coastal business. I'm like, well, there is population density there, so sure. But our platform is really broad, and because we make our food with the people who eat it and grow it, being able to cater to all of their tastes is one of the differentiating points of the business, because the way big food generally makes food is they make food for averages, and then they add a bunch of salt and sugar, which are addictive substances, to the food, right? But when you're trying to make fruits and vegetables in their unadulterated form taste good to everybody, that's really where our model of making food for individuals comes in, and the personalization required, and our platform as a whole being able to make food for individuals is so differentiated.
I think it's also a testament to the way we've grown the portfolio, right? Not just in the flavor profile direction, but as Rachel mentioned, 11 different categories, soon to be 12.
Across day parts, yes.
Yeah.
We have a big launch coming tomorrow.
So
do you want to share it?
Yeah, do you want to go in?
No, you too. Oh, okay, I'll start.
You start.
We haven't talked about it yet,
I know.
so I'm like, I don't know, nervous. But so we're launching our version of plant-based meat tomorrow.
You are?
Yes, and it is hugely different because it is grown in the ground, grown in the earth.
You can clap.
Thank you.
Rachel, say it again. What is it?
So it's grown in the ground and not in a lab, which is the key differentiator. So really thinking about our mission for the benefit of people and planet, we want to make sure that it benefits both. A lot of the plant-based meats out there, while there is the best of intentions, everybody who's trying to get people to eat more plants, like kudos to you. But a lot of the ingredients used in those recipes,
they're not that healthy.
They're not
healthy. We had that
healthy.
conversation and that debate with the CEOs of those companies.
I like to say it's modern margarine. Like, we've been there, we've done that. Why are we doing this again?
Does anybody use margarine anymore?
But we're doing it again.
Yeah.
So we're launching our own plant-based meat tomorrow.
Wow.
And you see the ingredients. You see lentils. You see seeds. You see these amazing natural sources of protein that are adding to biodiversity, adding to cover crop land coverage, and adding in a substantive way to human health.
Do you have any questions? Yeah, Meg.
Are it expensive when AG subsidies for non-organics are factored in, or the costs of poor health outcomes which impact labor aren't considered?
I think that's a great question. I think when we look at the costs of agricultural commodities or anything that people purchase, right, we only tend to focus on what's the price at the grocery store. And I think that's why we're so committed to a different way, because the end results of the impact that the current system has had on human health, right? And we know the state of the country and the state of the world in terms of the health challenges that exist, the strain that has on the healthcare system, the strain that has honestly on education and growth in communities, right? When you're eating the wrong food, it is shown that it has a negative output on your growth, early stage in particular. So I think it's a great question. How you actually do that full cost accounting of the different models is hard. And so a lot of what we are focused on, again, is proving the outcomes as opposed to suggesting the alternative that exists today is bad. I think people generally know that. It's now about proving the alternative.
What about the price point in terms of accessibility? Like, you're working with farmers, so that's one thing you're thinking about in terms of community and increasing the accessibility. But often we talk about organic food or healthier food. It's more expensive. And so it makes it inaccessible to so much of our population.
Absolutely. Today. So where we really focus is on transitional organic. And the reason that's so important is because after farmers actually made that transition from conventional to organic, they can have higher yields. They can make more money. It's like wonderful for their business models. But during that 3-year period, it's rough. So
how quickly do they recoup their investment?
Well, so it depends. Again, it's with ag, it's always it depends, unfortunately. But
which is why it's so hard to quantify a lot of things.
And that's why we're stepping in the models we're using, where we're saying, let us actually help you through that transition.
So are you helping financially?
Correct.
Which is very much like what Whole Foods did in terms of a lot of its suppliers. Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, what we're actually doing is committing financially in different ways, but specifically in actually purchasing of that raw material that they're
market for it.
Okay.
Correct. It's the market that's missing.
So they've got guaranteed.
Money is helpful, right? I think, there's no question that as we talk to some of that community, they'll talk about needing more funding and needing more investment, but it's the market that's missing.
So I cut you off though in accessibility.
Yes.
In terms of price
Yes,
points.
so it really is a supply-demand issue. So the more supply of organic we can create, the lower those prices will get over time. So as I said, it's the long game for us. We know that like organic is expensive and regenerative is expensive because it's such a small, it's 1% of 1% today. So if we can make those investments, like we know that it is expensive today, and there's no hiding it. There's no need to, but we're talking about how over time we bring the cost down and make it more accessible.
The other thing I'd add here is I think that we often, again, focus on the end consumer, and we don't focus enough on the farming community. And so, another program we've launched in the last year is a multi-year partnership with the American Farmland Trust and CCOF, investing in underserved, underrepresented farmers in California to make sure that they can maintain access to their land, to actually have the tools and the services that they need.
This is the upstream.
This is upstream, but
we're focusing upstream. And what's so great is the more we scale, the more we grow, the more good we can do. And this is another example. Do you want to?
No, I would just argue that it is upstream, and it also is directly impacting people that are also consumers. And so those consumers now are more stable so that they can eat better. They can eat the food that they're growing, quite frankly.
Right. Meg, wait, I'm going to take another question from the audience. Go ahead.
It's a great question. We have not completed, and we are evaluating.
In the process.
One thing we also, again, the comparisons.
This is an important part of the process.
It is. And the comparisons are helpful, but really more for us as a business, and Rachel's been really clear about this from day one, more for us to challenge ourselves. We're not in it to be able to say, oh, us versus them, right? Like to Rachel's point, we have a lot of respect for the other businesses that are trying and doing other things. We have a particular ethos and a belief on what's the best approach. But yeah, we will be doing more rigorous assessment to say, what is the impact of this?
One more?
How are you advancing accessibility and consumer education?
Wait, repeat the question. They couldn't hear.
How are you advancing accessibility and consumer education?
How are you advancing accessibility and consumer education?
Yeah, so this is hard. People don't want to necessarily read about more like doom and gloom, right? There's enough of it in our world today, and it's not clickbait. So thinking about how we get people how we open consumers' eyes to some of the solutions. There's a feeling of hopelessness. Well, like here's some very concrete steps that we can take. But the way that we've done it, if you've ever seen the Daily Harvest brand, is it's very light. And that is really by design. We try to educate consumers in a way that doesn't feel like taking your medicine, that feels very light and approachable and fun. And that's really the approach that we've taken, and it's worked. I mean, even just we are frozen, and that is for so many reasons. Food waste, convenience, just I could go on and on, but I'm not going to.
But you do it at a certain point where the peak nutrients are there, and
more nutrients. Like there's so many reasons, and like even that took a lot of education. We came into a market where everybody associated frozen food with dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets and frozen pizza.
Yeah.
So
frozen string beans from years ago.
Totally. And we've made such an impact. Like people are always like, oh, the frozen market's on fire. And I'm like, sure. But we've been like preaching the gospel for years, and it's cutting through because of the way that we're doing it. Through TikTok, through Instagram, through all of these really approachable formats, which make it more fun.
I'd also say my favorite thing to see from our consumers is their excitement and enthusiasm for ingredients they've never heard of, and not in the bad way, right? Yeah. Oh, I've never heard of that. Oh, because it's a new variety of sweet potato. Right, and so I think we see that time and time again, that part of that engagement is around just the excitement in the food you're eating and an interest in, oh, wow, that ingredient combination with that's the hook, right? Then you get them in and you can talk to them more about agricultural practices and things like that.
And that Murasaki sweet potato that I think Ricky is alluding to, is part of the biodiversity puzzle.
We could go on, but we can't. Rachel, Ricky, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Great question from the audience.
Please welcome to the stage Luis Aguirre Torres, Director of Sustainability for the City of Ithaca, New York, Donnel Baird, CEO of BlocPower, Tommy Freeman, Strategic Partnerships at Alturas, and Taylor Rowe, Director of Customer and Capital Partnerships at The Clean Fight, for a conversation with Bloomberg Green's Amanda Coulson-Hurley.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to be here to talk about what I think is a bold and historic project. The city of Ithaca, New York, is decarbonizing all of its buildings, trying to electrify them by 2030, which is obviously a pretty short runway to do something quite ambitious. But I've got the dream team here that's going to make it happen. And I think I'll start with Luis. Can you tell us a little bit about this project? Why electrification by 2030? Why Ithaca?
Well, let me start by saying that it is bold, but also very crazy. It's one of those things that people tell you, don't do it, don't even try, man. But we still did it. And I was inspired by what Gina McCarthy was saying, how stubborn she is and how stubborn we must be, to address the challenge of climate change. So what happens is you get, you normally go from ambition to pledge to finance and operations, and then at the end of the day, we do very little. So, and at the same time, like from the federal government to the state government to local government, the ambition, gets smaller and smaller. So I was very happy to find out when I came to Ithaca that there was a whole community, a whole city that was willing to go for the whole thing. And they were not willing to back down. They were going to go like, we're going to decarbonize the entire city, not only the building stock, the entire city by 2030. So then the next task was, to figure out how. And I remember, with the previous mayor, Mayor Marek, he asked me the question, can we do this? And I said, of course we can. Hell, we can, yeah. And then I went home and I was telling my wife, like, oh God, how are we going to do this? But the truth is, you look at the emissions, you look at the source of the emissions, and then we realize that almost half of the emissions come from buildings, and in buildings it is energy use. So we know how to deal with new buildings, that's codes, we can do that. But existing buildings, that's people's homes, businesses, it's really hard. So you need to figure out how to do that. And then we saw that, if we were to do one by one, it would be too expensive and it would be too risky, from an investor's perspective. So we need to aggregate projects. And then we figured that we needed to help the industry, consolidate, and we needed to, increase sophistication also in the market. We have very few options to do this. So we started, putting together the pieces, and then one day, I think if you are lucky in life, it happens to you a few times. One day you wake up and it's like, God, I got it. Like it clicks one day, And we realized, and I oversimplify, but at the end of the day, what we did was, we need to aggregate, all of these projects so we can manage risk for the entire project, and then we can securitize. Then we can attract private capital. And then the last thing I want to say is that, once we figure it out, we realized that we couldn't do it alone. So we need to figure out, the policy aspects, the finance aspects, the technology aspects, the operation aspects. And then they came along. And I was like, okay, my job is done here. These guys can take over. And we embarked on a wonderful, wonderful project that the city approved in November. And we're in the middle of it, and it's been a blast.
So you said, and then they came along. I believe that the city has 6,000 buildings. Is that right?
That's correct.
So Donnel, do you want to talk about where BlocPower comes in to transforming those buildings?
Yeah, so glad to be here and really proud of the incredible leadership that Luis has provided. Sometimes you can tell, but Luis, I think when the history of the fight against the climate crisis is written, that Luis is going to be one of the most important players. And what he's accomplished is amazing and inspirational, not in like a vague kind of way, in that Perth, Australia, and Glasgow, Scotland, and San Jose, California are looking to follow Ithaca's lead. That Luis has done the work to kind of do the heavy lifting and, has the machete at cutlass at the front of the jungle to cut away the hard jungle patch and clear the path for everyone else. So I'm delighted to be here today. What BlocPower does is we want to turn buildings into Teslas. And what do we mean by that? Well, Tesla and electric vehicle manufacturers have figured out how to rip fossil fuel engines out of automobiles and make them all electric. They can run on clean electricity. We can now do the same thing with buildings. With new buildings and with existing buildings, we can rip out the oil, the gas, equipment that we use to heat hot water, to provide heating, air conditioning, that we use to cook with gas stoves. We can rip out all of that fossil fuel equipment out of buildings and replace it with 100% all electric equipment. So now that we can do that from a hardware perspective, we should do that. The buildings are healthier. They are safer. The buildings don't leak methane at night, which is what your gas stove does. It leaks methane that you and your kids breathe in all night, every night. So when we rip out that fossil fuel equipment, your building should be greener, healthier, safer, more economical, more valuable. And so what we do at our company is build digital models of buildings and help building owners understand how they can save money and make money while upgrading their building to all electric energy. And so we have a project with Jeff Bezos, who's now the world's largest climate philanthropist, where he's given us some money, or should I say some Amazon stock, which we're supposed to sell, except it's down. The Amazon stock is down. Anyway. The funding allows us to build a digital model of 125 million buildings across America so that we can simulate for all American homeowners how they can decarbonize and electrify their buildings. And so we're going to be doing that in Ithaca so that all 6,000 buildings understand what size of equipment, what kind of equipment they can and should adopt in order to decarbonize. And we're going to provide those plans to all building owners for free. So that's what we do.
Wow, that's great. But I know that although BlocPower is a major partner in this effort, I know there are other companies, startups involved. And Taylor, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the role of the Clean Fight in this project.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It's great to be here, and it's great to be here with these great folks. So at the Clean Fight, we're focused on accelerating the adoption of climate tech solutions in New York. We have over half of the technology solutions we need to meet our net zero goals, and we believe that one of the best ways to achieve climate impact is to scale those. So to do this, we bring together innovative solutions, visionary customer partners who are ready to install those solutions today, capital partners who can help us break down the financial barriers for broad adoption. And we really try to bring those folks together in our program, which is focused on driving towards demonstrations, business agreements, financing, and investment. So we have an incredibly rigorous vetting process that helps us select growth stage startups from around the world. We pair them with our partners to explore potential opportunities, and I think what we're doing in Ithaca is a perfect example of the types of partnerships that we hope to build and support. So The project that we're working on right now is one of the first steps towards the broader adoption of smart electrification technologies throughout Ithaca. We're starting with a building owned and operated by a nonprofit called the Ithaca Neighborhood Housing Services. It's a historic building located in downtown Ithaca. It's 24,000 square feet, mixed use and affordable multifamily building. They provide 12 apartments to low and moderate income families and office space for primarily nonprofit tenants. And we're bringing together 3 of our Clean Fight cohort companies to implement a demonstration project around electrification. So Illum Energy is one of our companies that was founded in Australia. They're providing behind-the-meter solar via their patented controller called the SolShare that enables individual tenants to benefit from solar on their rooftop. We have Switch Energy, which is a Toronto-based company, which is providing end-to-end electric vehicle fast charging stations and related controls, and Urban Electric Power, which is providing energy storage systems using its patented rechargeable alkaline battery technology. So we're really excited about these technologies. We're really hopeful that they provide a great demonstration for other buildings across Ithaca and also beyond.
And is the hope, too, that by bringing together some of these newer technologies and companies, perfecting them, giving them the means to do demonstration projects, that it'll help these companies scale up?
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's great. I should have announced when I came on stage, by the way, if people have questions, please submit them. We will have a few minutes for questions and answers at the end of the session. So, but before that, Tommy, yes. Somebody has to pay for all of this.
That's right.
And no one has done this before. Luis just described it as kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So, why do you think it's a risk worth taking?
Yeah, it's a good question. And when I first met Luis and he kind of told me about what the city was doing and it was crazy, I'm like, we got to be a part of this. This is a unique opportunity to really kind of build the blueprint of how we can actually accelerate the adoption of all the technologies that Donnel's talking about and Taylor's talking about. And, it's going to require hundreds of billions of dollars of investment globally in order to make this type of transition to the clean global economy actually happen. And if we put that burden on every business owner or every homeowner to be able to come up with that upfront investment, it's not going to happen, at least not in time, right? So, that's where private capital is really going to come in and help accelerate that. And it is a little bit of a risk, obviously, because the city is the first one to do this, but that's part of the excitement behind it as well. Is that it's our job now to get creative and to figure out how to make this work.
Yeah, I'm curious about how you phase a project like this, right? I mean, you've got until 2030. Which is not that many years left, right? And 6,000 buildings. So I understand there are kind of 2 main stages, right? But how, I guess I'm curious, this is mostly a question, I think, for Luis and Donnel, how you decide what buildings come first or what steps come first. And are there things that have a lot more impact if you do them in 2023 as opposed to 2027 or?
Yeah. I mean, the way you start looking at a project like this is with data. So you have to look at. You mentioned we have 6,000 buildings. It's a small city, and you look at the type of economy that we have, and then you understand, what is that you can expect in terms of energy profile for every building. But then, you go back to the data, and in data you see like 6,000 buildings, 70% are residential, 30% commercial and industrial. Out of the residential, 70% of the units are rentals, for example. 90% use natural gas, 8% propane, 2% fuel oil. So you start getting all this data, and then you start looking at, how some of these buildings have already replaced their furnace or they have already made improvements in terms of retrofitting. So not everybody's going to do this. The numbers are not going to pencil out all the time. So initially, you really start with a voluntary program, but what you create is a compelling product, financial product and an economic incentive for people to participate. So you need to understand, which technologies can play. That's what Taylor was talking about. But mostly, you need to use that data to figure out the best way of identifying solutions that are good at the moment that you are trying to address, a low-hanging fruit. And I'll, let Donnel probably complete this part, but I just want to say that when we look at the energy profile for buildings in the city, we are able to identify which ones are prime for an upgrade, no? And then, the city is relying on a program manager that is BlocPower to basically take over from that, and then Donnel does his thing,
Right.
Then comes the hard part.
Yeah.
No, I concur with everything Luis has said. So when you have the data on all 6,000 buildings in the city, you can start to tranche and prioritize the buildings into which buildings are most likely to complete a project, which buildings need to complete a project, but they're not aware of it. And so you have to do customer education to let them know, hey, you're actually wasting a ton of money in your building, and you may not realize that, but you could be saving thousands of dollars a year if you did a retrofit based on the data that we have. You can use statistical modeling and machine learning to start to identify which buildings have furnaces that are about to fail, because you can analyze the installation dates of the gas furnaces in the home and say, okay, we're like 6 years out. We think you're probably going to fail in the next 24 months. You need to be on top of this. And then you start to educate those different groups of customers according to what makes sense for them. One of the things that we think is important is starting to look at air quality. The entire country during the pandemic has become keyed in on how important air quality is to our quality of life. If you can catch COVID as it moves apartment to apartment, or classroom to classroom for your kids, like all that stuff become really important, top of mind. Well, if you're burning fossil fuels in your home, whether it's oil or whether it's gas, you are releasing methane, nitrogen dioxide, all that kind of stuff. And it is increasing childhood asthma. It's really dangerous, crappy stuff. And so gas is actually going to end up being like lead. We thought that lead paint was like a cool thing. Bright colors, we spread it all over the country in all the buildings. And then it turns out that it causes significant neurological impairment. So now we got to go in and remove all the lead. Cooking with gas in your home is going to be like that, where as more and more studies come out, there's a study that came out from Stanford last month, right? As more and more data starts to come out, it's going to be really difficult from a health perspective to justify burning fossil fuels and then breathing it in your home. If you take a step back to think about it, would you grill a steak and then stick your head in the grill and breathe it? No, it's ridiculous. So helping building owners understand the value prop around health, along with greenhouse gas reduction, along with energy savings, along with increasing the value of their home at resale, all of those things create value for building owners. And so you want to target and market to different building owners according to what makes the most sense to them.
Yeah, I mean, is it different talking to homeowners as single-family homeowners as opposed to the owner of a multi-unit rental building?
That's right.
I would think, right? Different incentives.
That's right.
Different kind of case. But it sounds like your kind of tranches are really you're really looking at data and equipment age more than this type of building or that type of building.
Well, we analyze all of the physical characteristics of the building, the maintenance and financial records of the building, but then also analyze the characteristics of the building owner. Do they drive a Tesla? Okay, well, are they a member of the Sierra Club? Well, maybe this is someone that we should talk to. And what are the kinds of messages that we would offer to them based on who they are as a building owner and the characteristics of their building? So there's a big database with a data lake that we've aggregated all of this data so we can figure out how to sell different kinds of decarbonization technologies to different kinds of building owners.
And is BlocPower, is it correct to describe the business model as energy as a service? Is that, or can you talk a little bit about your business model if that isn't quite right?
Yeah, we're a decarbonization platform. I think energy as a service model is correct with one exception. We don't, I don't know if you guys do, we don't guarantee energy savings. There's a lot of fuzziness around hey, we guarantee you these energy savings up front. but oh, you left the lights on a Saturday morning, and so you've invalidated the contract, right? So when you get into the nitty-gritty details of energy service guaranteed performance contracts, there's always like an escape hatch. We don't want to play those games. What we want to do is come in and say, look, we're going to remove the fossil fuels from your home. We're going to save you a bunch of money. We're going to reduce your energy bill within this range, and then we're going to help finance it in partnership with Alturas or Goldman or Microsoft, who've provided us with some financing. But what we provide is green infrastructure CapEx as a service via our technology platform.
Okay, right. And Tommy, can you talk a little bit more about, I believe Alturas' investment so far was, what, $100 million?
That's what we've committed, yes.
Yeah, okay.
And we hope to get there, and so now we have to go out and identify the projects, but yeah, please.
All right, yeah. So what is the model then that, what is your promise to investors? I mean, how is this being packaged with the city, I guess?
Well, there were two, and I'm going to let probably Tommy fill the gaps here, but, at the very beginning of the process, we were looking at, first how we actually finance solar, small-scale solar, and we made it, possible to do it in the entire country. So there should be a way of financing electrification of buildings. And then at the same time, we started looking at the way, the Green Bank in Connecticut, for example, works, and the work that they do in terms of, aggregation, risk mitigation, and that's the way they incentivize the participation of private financial institutions. So when we started looking at that, we figured that they were, in terms of financing, you need to look at different models. But at the end of the day, it's, basically project finance, for an aggregate of projects. So there is, Donnel, he works with some partners, so there is, a combination of equity and debt. But then there is also the model that Alturas follows, which is, a full equity play on financing these projects. And they have different levels of risks, and they manage risks differently. But I think in the case of Alturas, they are looking at the commercial and industrial sector, and, that the numbers play differently for them. So I'm going to stop there and then probably let Tommy explain his thing better than me.
No, thank you. No, you hit it right on the nose there. And, from an investment standpoint, like, we kind of took the if you build it, they will come type of approach. So, if we say, hey, we've got the funding in place, like we're committing to actually like help these projects move along. So now the community will understand like there is somebody there that's going to actually help pay for these projects at the end of the day. So now it's time to go out and empower, companies like BlocPower and, local contractors to go out and actually identify projects and educate the building owners on here's what the options are for you, and present a case to the building owners that say, hey, if you want to electrify, here's a way to pay for it, without having to come up with $50,000 or $100,000 or $500,000, whatever it might be that has to actually implement that project. That's where we're able to kind of enable that to happen. And, from the financing standpoint, our goal is to make it as simple as possible for the customer. And, at the end of the day, we want it to be as cash flow neutral or better as possible. We want them to be able to save money. Will that happen every time? Probably not, right? But we hope that we can show them enough value in why they should do this and be a part of this program and get people to move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we're the program manager, so if all this doesn't work, we're the program managers, and we're contracted to deliver on all of this.
It's on you, man. If it doesn't.
Yeah, Luis is out of here. So, part of the way that we think about it is 20% of Ithaca is low LMI, low and moderate income.
22%, yeah.
22%, right? And so, now we got these are people, homes that, according to traditional financing approaches, are subprime. So what do we do, right? Because we've committed to decarbonize every single building, right? And when people think about Ithaca, they may not think about that 22%. And so what we've done is we spent a lot of time, 4 years actually, working with Goldman and their urban investment team studying the subprime mortgage market. What are the things that can be learned from the positive aspects of subprime? Not the part that destroyed the global economy. We're going to put that part on the shelf to the side. The underlying structure of a mortgage bond, right, that aggregates a pool of assets, as Louise has talked about, and spreads out the risk of default across that entire pool, what are the ways you can think about using structured financial products to ensure that clean energy is accessible to all Americans? And we think that it's critical not only to achieve Ithaca's goals, but just take a step back as people who care about climate. We are not going to be able to pass climate legislation and policy in the United States without significant participation and support from low-income communities. I mean, Senator Manchin from West Virginia has made that clear. If we had spent the last 5 years investing in solar factories and installation companies in West Virginia, we'd have a climate bill right now, right? And so this idea that we are going to have a clean energy revolution and like, oh, by the way, we're going to deal with low-income Americans because we're like nice people or we're ethical, I think is not the right way to think about it. We're not going to have a clean energy revolution without significant participation and engagement from low and moderate income communities. And so when you think about financial products, it has to be expansive and inclusive, not because it's the right thing to do, because there just isn't another strategic choice. And one of the things that I'm really proud of what Luis has done is, he didn't, tranche out the low income people into some separate poverty program and like, oh, we'll figure it out. Like, no. Everybody's going into a portfolio together and we're gonna figure out how to make this work. And that is why cities across the world are following his lead and Ithaca's lead, because it's a scalable approach. And if Goldman Sachs and Microsoft and Alturas can sign off on it, then we can do this all over the world. Yeah. So shout out to Luis.
Yeah, well said.
Well, that's a great point to end on, I think. Are there any questions?
Actually, a good one. Mike, is my mic working now? Okay, great. Cities are made out of people. What has been the community reaction, positive and negative, to this initiative? And what challenges would you forecast for less progressive towns in trying to scale this kind of approach?
Well, the reaction has been what you would expect, like it's progressive Ithaca, but at the same time, it's people's homes. At the end of the day, you're messing with people's homes. So that creates all kinds of reactions. Some people are really excited and willing to pay even if it costs a bit more, and other people are just terrified of this costing them. And what they saw John Oliver one day, and they think that this is the devil. We shouldn't do this. And so we have all kinds of reactions, but I think for the most part, the majority, supports this type of program. And I think it is everything that they describe. If you think about it, it has to do with data. It has to do with data, but at the same time, once you make a decision, then you approach people. It's about engagement with the community, having the community advising, participating, and making sure that all of their objections, all of their concerns are considered at the end of the day. So that's how you do it in places that are perhaps less progressive.
Yeah, I just want to wave in. So I'm like going to Texas to, I think they're going to let me drive a Ford Lightning. I'm very excited. And so they're going to like road test these things. It has to be a better truck, right? In order for it to sell, it just has to be better. And so when we electrify and decarbonize buildings, they have to be better homes, right? And if they're better, then yeah, you can go into conservative Americans sell it because it's better. So I think that's what we're shooting for, better and cheaper.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more. Could you expand on how you're incentivizing private investors to participate? Also, how are you budgeting in possible system instability or backup for any kind of system failure?
Like of the grid?
Are you talking about the grid? Is that the question? Well, that last part, we're working with a utility company. I mean, this is, when we did the first modeling, we realized that we couldn't electrify more than 15% of the city without the whole thing catching fire, quite literally. So we needed to make big investments on some of the infrastructure, but at the same time, you don't want to fall into the trap of just deploying more capital, because that's what the utility company does. They just deploy capital and make money by deploying capital. So you need to be creative and need to understand where the savings can be actually shared even with the utility company, because that way you incentivize them to adopt non-wires alternatives, for example, that would help make this happen. So we are dealing with that. We understand what that is, and we know exactly where we have to go, and we have a great partner with the utility company. And incentivizing the investors, they can answer better than me, but I can tell you that what we have is a huge market. It's a demonstration project for the entire planet where we are electrifying. I mean, and just think about it. The first electric city of that we're going to have in the United States.
But at the end, it's not just about electric buildings. It's the entire energy system. Is going to be different. And if we put climate justice on top of that, then it's truly the city of the future. And that's what we're building together. And I think there is a return on their investment because, we are aggregating these projects and eventually will be securitized and eventually there will be a return for the investors. Mm-hmm. But essentially, we are participating in something that nobody has done before. And who doesn't want to do that, really? I don't know, Tommy, if you want to. Sorry, I just.
No, it's exciting and, really incentivizing investors to do this. Groups like NYSERDA that have really put together programs on the back end that really help protect the investment at the end of the day, which is really going to enable more private capital to flow in and just get things to happen faster.
Everybody's got to make money off of this, right? This has to save the planet, and it has to make everybody a lot of money. And I think that's the brilliance of what's been structured here.
Yeah, and one thing, I know we are out of time, but just very quickly I want to say that we couldn't do this without NYSERDA, without really the state government being behind.
Governor
that's NYSERDA sponsored at some point BlocPower, the Clean Fight. The Clean Fight is coming up with all of these wonderful solutions. And about financial inclusion, through NYSERDA we're creating these great enhancements that otherwise would be impossible to address the low margin.
That's right.
So I just want to say that.
That's right.
Yeah.
New York State is the only state in the country where this could be happening right now because of the leadership. That's right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Great. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today. I think everybody learned a lot.
Thank you.
And good luck.
Okay.
Thank you.
See you in 6 years.
For most businesses, for many, many decades, they have assessed return on financial investment. But now we've got two new criteria. We've got environmental impact and social impact. It's particularly important when you're talking about real assets, buildings, infrastructure. They not only affect what happens within that building, but also the communities and the environmental impact beyond. At JLL, we're really talking about a total return on sustainability.
Please welcome to the stage Greg Ballino, Global Head of Sustainability, Strategy, and Asset Consulting at JLL, for a conversation with Bloomberg Green's Lauren Keel.
Good morning, everyone. Greg, good to have you with me.
Thank you, Lauren. Pleasure to be here.
We're here to talk about value and returns. And we know companies are focusing so much more on sustainability. We're seeing that pressure that Gina was talking about earlier from the government side. We're seeing that customer and consumer pressure that the Daily Harvest team was talking about. But right before we jumped onto the stage, they were talking about how you have to make money out of this too, right? You got to make some money. So talk to us about that evolving case for sustainability, business side.
It's important. I mean, first, it's worth saying that there are real benefits to investing in sustainability in the traditional terms of real estate value, occupancy rates, rents, operating costs, and that's important. I think it's more important to kind of observe that value is migrating. The expectations in buildings, the performance parameters is causing a rethink of what buildings are worth. Now, right now, it's a little bit of a drift. So the drift could be upward if the building has some advantages. It could be downward if it's going to be a substantial investment or if it's complicated to put it on the right pathway. But if you think about that in the terms of, what do? You have to start looking at that drift now. Think also about the big outcomes of an investment in sustainability, carbon, resources like water and waste, human capital outcomes, productivity, efficiency, engagement. These are critical for companies trying to figure out the conundrum of not only return to work, but the future of work. Social value, obviously also important, and risk, important to all of us. So, if you think about a case on those outcomes made for what's it worth in the either protecting the value of the portfolio or improving the value, it's a sturdy case. In fact, it looks more like an imperative.
And I know you're talking to people across such a wide range, from investors to people who are actually occupying these spaces. I can only imagine the conversations that you're having with somebody in Texas in the US are very different than the ones you're having with somebody in Amsterdam or in Hong Kong. So tell us about that. How are those conversations evolving?
Well, I mean, there's always tensions, natural ones, between owners and investors. But I think what's really interesting is there's a bit of a shift as they start to look at their own goals. How will I achieve the goals I've set on both sides? And that kind of rethink is looking very simply like, well, what if I face a really costly upgrade? Do I want to make that? Or on the tenant side, if I look down all my leases, which ones of these buildings don't pass muster? So you could see a bunch of churn in the market, and we might. But more importantly, you could see a whole lot of collaborating start to become obvious, mutual investment between the investor and the owners. Now, green leases are already going on. There's a big trend toward green leases. Today, I think that's just a modicum of a start, because green leases today feel a lot like maybe negotiating checklists of terms. But the original intent, a decade or more ago, was that green leases would create incentives for co-investment. And I think we'll see much more innovative partnerships. And I don't know what they'll look like, whether it's contractual things or partner terms or equity investments. But the relationship between the investment and the owner and the occupier is critical, because they can de-risk each other's goals.
And one of the other things I'm sure you're working on with a lot of these people is helping them find a net zero pathway, which is easier said than done sometimes. But what does that look like? Just kind of paint me a picture of what that pathway would look like.
Well, I mean, the key underlying challenge is data, which everyone knows. It's at the top of everyone's complaint, and it underpins all the thinking about the net zero carbon pathway. The key overarching problem is that a lot of companies have set net zero carbon goals. In fact, 2/3 of companies report that they have, or more. Most of them admit that they don't have a clear path to achieving it. And look, it's understandable, like no judgment. It's hard, right? The data's not there. But it's going to force moving from what were traditionally incremental improvements in energy efficiency and cost, mostly operating performance, into more step change, improvements. So we partnered with the World Economic Forum late last year, published a checklist, 10 green building principles as to what it would look like or take to decarbonize buildings. And there's some obvious things on there, like more efficiency, more renewable energy, but it starts to illustrate much more importance around thinking infrastructure. And I mean energy infrastructure, energy assets like renewables, on-site and elsewhere, but also energy systems, fuel cells, thermal storage, geothermal systems, even batteries. Why? Because it will allow you to start to match the consumption and use that the building might need with renewable power that's available. Now, data center folks are already doing that, or they're investing, or they've announced and are on paths to achieve what they call 24-hour matching. So as soon as companies realize that expectation will be upon them, they'll start to look for that. And right now, the PPA market, purchasing power agreements for renewables, is already getting tight, because there's a lot of companies out there. So I think it's a key area to think about, and it's a challenge because these are new investments. The other one, I think, is transportation. People were surprised at how quickly the electrification of transportation came into the foreground. I wasn't terribly surprised. I also think we're underestimating the potential movement of the sector. So look at it this way. Either the official estimates are going to be right, and Ford Motor Company is going to have a terrible decade. They're spending $40-some-odd billion electrifying their automobiles. Or Ford is more right, and there's going to be a heck of a lot more vehicles on the road in a short amount of time. I think it's the latter. We have to at least be open to the possibility that our estimates are actually low. Then you look at buildings. You say, okay, I'm a company with 1,000 spots in the parking lot, and I've got 8 chargers. What would it look like to have 80? What would it look like to have 800? Now, let's stipulate that that's a future problem. Now let's look at a right now problem, which is if you're a logistically intensive company and you've got depots and distribution centers, and you've got sort of short-haul trucks that are moving between distribution centers and pool centers, something like 60% of our trucking miles are those short-haul routes. If you and I ran that company, we would know that tomorrow morning we could get 5, 10, 15, maybe as much as 20% cost savings annually by electrifying that fleet, because the short-haul routes are easier to electrify. So then you say, well, then we just need to build infrastructure, and we'll put it on the highway. No, these trucks turn around every 45 minutes. They have to be charged in the locations they're sitting. So then you go to your landlord and you say, I need infrastructure. So again, these are critical investments, and I think really heightening the need to invest in things. Interesting business models, interesting partner models. We're working with them, but people are going to have to consider all these things.
I bet if I asked people in this audience what they think of when they think of JLL, they'd say real estate or buildings. But you're increasingly thinking about yourselves and talking about yourselves as a technology company.
Yes, we are.
And why is that, and how does that tie to that pathway to net zero?
Well, we're investing huge in technology through JLLT, the company that is our tech platform company, and in our core business. I think it's worth saying that there's an arms race, or maybe even a feeding frenzy, for companies that have asset data or have platforms. And we see that. We also see all the prop tech that's exploding in that same neighborhood as evolving this constellation of platforms you might need. And I think it's important. We're going to stay in that, and we're in it big because it will be required. But I'll just give you 2 or 3 examples just by illustration. We built a platform called Carbon Pathfinder, which codified all of our best expertise about what it would look like to decarbonize a building. The fabric, the lighting, the ventilation, what would it cost, what would it return in terms of improvement, so that we could help create scenarios on what might be massive portfolios and start to think about what would the investment plan look like in real terms, not just in top-down guesswork terms. So that's a critical thing. We created something called Performa, which takes all of our transactive asset information about purchases and value and codified the value into understanding how that's going to be changing and how we could create econometric models that relate to ESG performance or the performance around the sustainable outcomes I mentioned. These are critically important. We bought a company called Hank, which actually uses AI to, in real time, dynamically dispatch and manage the building management system so that they could operate. That's just the start of what's happening. I will tell you the arms race will continue, and it's a big deal, and it'll change quite a bit over the next few years.
Does regulation help you in this space? Are you looking for more regulation? I feel like we're starting to get there. There's appetite here in the U.S. There's long been in Europe. Is that helpful to you?
I think the important thing is to not get into a compliance mindset. I think it's easy to go into the wait and see, but the problem is the market forces I described before are moving a lot faster than the regulatory cycle. And so you think about smart investors are moving now, and we'll think about compliance along the route. Look at cities. I think it's really important, even as I say that, to understand the compliance landscape. Cities, there's 385 some odd cities that made carbon targets in the world. My hometown, Ann Arbor, Michigan, is literally standing up an electric utility in order for them to achieve their 820 goals, which is net zero carbon by 2028, one of the most ambitious in the country. And everyone's freaked out a bit about Rule 97 in New York, but there are 30 other cities that are actually collaborating to write model building codes that will be implemented in cities and counties around the country in the U.S. So that's going to be really important. And I think the SEC rule, obviously, is important and consequential. But again, the gestation on that is going to be a couple of years. I don't recommend waiting and seeing for that at all.
We have just a couple moments left. So tell me, what do you think the biggest challenge you're going to have to deal with is in decarbonizing real estate?
Oh, there's a bunch. I'll just say personally, talent. We are hiring like it's 1999. And if anybody remembers what the labor market back then was, or if you like Prince, there's a fervent push to get the talent that's needed. We've multiplied our investments in learning, development, talent acquisition, advisory. What's incredible about that is Prince wrote that song in 1984.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you.
Thanks to JLL for this sponsor spotlight. We're going to take a quick break, so we'll see you all back here at 11:30.
Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please welcome back to the stage Meg Szabo, Senior Editor for Bloomberg Green and Sustainability Events.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I think people are still cycling in. But before we get started to get back up again, I did want to just take one more chance to acknowledge our premier partners, General Motors, Wholesome, and JLL, and our presenting sponsors, Ralph Lauren Corporation, iShares, the Paper and Packaging Board, and Zurich Insurance Group. Just a couple of quick reminders again. If you want to submit questions, the QR code is located on the back of your badge, so you can submit questions there. I'll be in the front row. I will give them to the speaker. Rebecca Moore, who is going to be our next speaker, will be taking some questions, so feel free to submit those as she's doing her presentation. And just a reminder to silence your phones, and even though you will be using them, please silence them so that we don't hear them in here. I think that is it. So with that, let's please get started. We'll get back started again. Let me introduce to you Rebecca Moore, Director of Google Earth, Earth Engine, and Outreach.
Good morning, fellow changemakers. It's great to be with you. I'm going to be talking, this is the nerd part. I know there have been other nerd parts, but I'm going to be talking about accelerating climate action with green eyes in the sky. So it's no surprise, I think, to any of us here that we have a dramatic crisis going on, and the tipping points are already happening. The planetary tipping points, for example, the largest carbon removal source on the planet, the Amazon rainforest, last year, according to Nature, switched to becoming a net emitter of carbon rather than a remover of carbon. If this isn't sort of a wake-up call for all of us, nothing is. So my team at Google, the Google Earth team, for more than a decade, we've been trying to focus on how could we mobilize the best of Google's mapping technology, the data that we have, invent new technology as needed to help accelerate progress on climate change, addressing that, and other environmental sustainability issues. Maps are incredibly powerful tools for informing decision-making, for raising awareness, driving advocacy, and we wanted to bring the best of that to these problems. Fortunately, there's amazing Earth observation data that is freely available to all of us through enlightened data policies of the US government, the European government, and so on. And in 2008, NASA and USGS made the monumental decision to make the Landsat archive the longest continuous Earth observing mission ever, which started during the Vietnam War era and has been continuously operating since then, make all that data public, open, and free. It was millions of images of the planet, petabytes of data, billions of megabytes of data, sitting on tapes in a vault. And many of those images had never been accessed or mined for insights. So when you have a massive big data from space archive like that has so much potential to inform our understanding of how the planet, what is the current state of the planet, how has it been changing over time, what are the trends, be able to predict. There was a need to create a new platform, and scientists, rainforest nations, a number of folks came to us and said, we like Google Maps, we like Google Earth, but what we really need is Google to build the world's most comprehensive environmental analytical engine, bring all that data off tapes, bring it online, have it accessible. We understand Google has a few computers in your data centers. Give us access to that. And it was really important because we were losing, at that time they said, 1 million acres of the Amazon every year to tropical deforestation happening in remote places that were not supportable by law enforcement on the ground, but you could build a virtual alerting system with this type of data, except it would take them weeks or months or years to try to analyze it on a single computer. So we built what we called Earth Engine, Google Earth Engine. We're now bringing all that data online, co-located with tens of thousands of computers for scientists and all sorts of practitioners to use for free our data and our capabilities for getting an understanding of the planet. The big breakthrough, and I'm gonna do a fast history thing here, the big breakthrough was Matt Hansen of University of Maryland was did the first global high-resolution map and measurement of the forests of the world and how they're changing over time using Earth Engine, based on that Landsat archive that had taken us 3 years to bring off all those tapes, working with USGS and online in the Google Data Center. It took 1 million hours of computation to run his scientific algorithms, but because we ran it on 10,000 computers, we had the result in 4 days, which may seem like a lot, but on a single computer it would have taken 15 years. So just wanted to share that with you because it's like, wow, we can now, scientists and everyone can now ask and answer questions that were never possible before. It's not about, instead of 10 minutes, it takes 5 minutes. It's like, no, instead of I can't ask this because it would have taken years, it's like, I can have this at my fingertips. So Earth Engine, if you want to step back, it is sort of 3 things. It is this largest, updating every 15 minutes, data catalog of Earth science data, environmental information streaming in from hundreds of sources. It's now 50 petabytes of data, growing by a petabyte a month. As I said, we co-locate it with massive computing resources. With a few lines of JavaScript, you can say, tell me all the change over the Amazon for the last 40 years, and boom. I say to some of our partners, you're dimming the lights of Google when you run that thing. And they're like, yeah, we like doing that. And then, because it's been out there for a decade now, we have this amazing ecosystem of scientists, NGOs, governments, UN environment programs, so on, who are using, and now private industry who are using this, sharing algorithms, sharing data. It's a really fantastic ecosystem. So I mentioned that breakthrough science study of forest change. What we're really excited about is the trend is now, yes, we can turbocharge the science, but now let's turn it into practical, operational, daily applications that are providing insights to decision makers or transparency where that is needed. So Global Forest Watch, led by WRI, powered by Earth Engine, is a great example of that, issuing alerts that are weekly, I think at this point, that are directly leading to reduction in deforestation. Not everywhere, because data doesn't do everything, but in a number of places. The U.S. Forest Service is using Earth Engine to manage more than 500 million acres of public lands. And Unilever is now at the forefront of eliminating deforestation from their palm oil supply chain and their other commodity supply chains, which is super exciting. So let's take a second on that. You're looking here at the kind of analysis that you can do with Earth Engine, where you have at your fingertips all these different data sets. You can bring in your own data. And in this case, this is informing decision making about the mills from which to source palm oil, because you can derive insights about the level of deforestation associated with the palm oil coming from those mills. Longer conversation I'm happy to talk later about. OpenET is a fantastic collaboration with NASA, EDF, and Desert Research Institute, which is using the thermal band of Landsat. So this is not just images or pictures, it's scientific data that is measuring the heat that is radiating from all of these places. And with a lot of this data, you can derive information on the agricultural crop uptake of water, and from that derive insights about the use of aquifer water, of groundwater, which, as you can imagine, in places like the American West, where we have increasing scarcity of water resources and a lot of contention, that type of data made freely available to everyone enables much better planning and management of water resources. Okay, we're going to switch to cities. So I think it's understood that cities are really where a lot of the action is in terms of creating change around transportation, building emissions, and so on. So again, we are sourcing public data and we collect data, street view and so on, aerial imagery. How can we bring that, how can we mobilize that to help cities with their climate action planning? We worked with Global Covenant of Mayors, C40, a number of partners to build what we call the Environmental Insights Explorer, that is distilling from all of our raw geospatial data insights around building emissions, transportation activity, opportunities to reduce CO2 through, for example, solar, air pollution at a hyper-local street level, and then insights around where does it make sense to plant trees for addressing urban heat island effects. So to give you just an insight about the data, this is Project Sunroof, which is a part of Environmental Insights. We're looking at every 10 centimeter pixel on that roof. We're modeling what is the solar energy potential of that place. Here we're looking at, and we model it over 15-minute intervals over every day of the year, taking into account shading and weather and latitude and all these other things. And it's producing the most accurate rooftop solar data that's available. We've now produced data for more than 100 million buildings, more than 20,000 cities. We've made this available to the cities, and it's leading to real action I'll mention later. Project AirView is, Fred Krupp of EDF said, hey, you're driving those street view cars around, why not turn them into mobile environmental sensors and measure air quality while you're doing that? We did that, and we have data for a number of cities now, hyper-local data, which is excellent for driving action planning. Here's our data for the city of Copenhagen. That was a collaboration with the city, and they're using that data now, the insights they derived about areas of pollution, how they can now create clean air, what they call thrive zones, targeted for children under 5. Hundreds of cities are now using Environmental Insights Explorer. Houston came up with a really ambitious plan of 5 million megawatt hours based upon the information they got from our data. City of Los Angeles is managing the planting of 90,000 trees to address urban heat island effects and so on. It's been really exciting to see that. And I have to say, as Google, we're just a piece of all this, right? I like to say we're kind of like, this is a very 90s analogy, but we're kind of like the IT department inside these efforts that really require working with cities and institutions on the ground who understand what's needed and how to apply it in practice. Our CEO made a commitment that we're really serious about helping cities with this and bringing whatever we can to bear, and our goal is to help cities reduce a gigaton of carbon by 2030. So we encourage, we now have data available for more than 40,000 cities. We don't have all of those insights available for every city, but Most of them are available for most cities, and please check it out. So just in closing, I look at a lot of satellite imagery and over the years, and people ask me, do you ever get depressed, right? Like, do you ever get disheartened? And of course, we're looking here at deforestation of the Amazon. It's hard not to feel that. But what you also see is growing solar farms, growing wind farms. You see restoration projects that are so successful, like in Costa Rica, tree planting there through government policy. You can see it from space. And so I think the opportunity we have now, the science exists and is clear, the technology exists to turbocharge climate action. We just need to put it into practice, right? I don't want to be looking back in 10 years and saying, oh wow, we wrote the obituary of our planet in ever higher resolution. No, that's not the goal. We built this thing called time-lapse, almost 40-year history of the planet that we launched in Google Earth. This is one of my favorite places that you can see. The time-lapse exposes beautiful, like mesmerizing, natural, geologic processes that take place maybe over decades. And they kind of, I think, make us all fall in love with the planet. It's worth fighting for. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you. So are we at time? Okay, I think we're done. Yes? All right, thank you all.
Please welcome to the stage Jagdeep Singh, the co-founder, CEO, and chairman of QuantumScape, for a conversation with Bloomberg Green's Akshat Rathi.
I don't have to tell you much about how important batteries are for the energy transition, but it helps to put the importance in numbers and why the hype around this technology is probably real. So in 2016, BP, the oil company, which puts out an annual outlook, suggested that by 2035, there would be about 70 million electric cars on the road. As of this year, that number is likely to be hit in 2025. So in a 20-year prediction, they were off by about 10 years. And that's what's happening to the entire auto industry. And the heart of the electrical vehicle transformation is the battery. And with us, we have one of the hottest battery startup CEOs, Jagdeep. Welcome, Jagdeep.
Thank you.
Now, batteries are complicated. What is inside them is complicated. So let's just start with why QuantumScape has something different from what's available on the market, which is a commodity now.
Yeah, sure. So a battery basically consists of three key elements. There's a cathode, which is a positive electrode, an anode, which is a negative electrode. I don't know if this mic is working. Let's try this. Hold on a second. Move it up a little. Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
All right, we'll move it up. So I was just saying that a battery has three electrodes. Two electrodes, an anode, which is a negative electrode, a cathode, the positive electrode, and then an insulator in the middle that's called a separator. And that whole stack is infused with a liquid, which is the medium through which lithium ions move up and down. And all a battery is doing is, it's the electrochemical equivalent of rolling a ball uphill, which is when you put work into the system to charge the battery. When the ball is sitting at the top of the hill, that's the equivalent of the lithium ion sitting in the anode. Energy is stored. And when you let the ball roll back downhill, that's the equivalent of letting the lithium ions roll back into the cathode, and energy can be withdrawn from the system. That's all the battery is doing. What we are doing is increasing the energy density of the battery by basically eliminating the material that makes up the anode.
Right, and that's supposed to increase the amount of range that a car would have if it had the same size battery.
Precisely. Energy density is a measure of how much energy you can store in a given amount of volume or mass. And so higher energy density translates to greater driving range.
Right.
But the other key thing this approach gives you is it gives you a greater power density, which is the equivalent of how fast you can charge the car.
Right.
So the beauty of a solid state approach like we're doing is you simultaneously can address two problems that generally have required trade-offs. So you can get high range, we think more than 50% range compared to conventional batteries, coupled with fast charge times. And again, our target is 15-minute charge. So think of a car, you could take, for example, a car like a Tesla Model 3 and imagine 50% greater miles per charge, coupled with 15-minute charge. That's the potential of a solid-state lithium-metal battery.
But now we're talking 50% relative to batteries where they are today.
Yes.
You started on this 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So you were making a bet that was wild at the time and remains wild because you still have it only in the lab and not really on the manufacturing floor. So what is the hard step first to get here and then to be able to put it in a car?
Yeah, when we started the company back in 2010, I was driving a Tesla Roadster. I thought it was a cool car. It was fast. It was green. But in some ways, it was really a prototype of a vehicle. But the potential for it to be a mainstream car was very exciting. And the key to doing that in our minds was to come up with a better battery. So we took the bet back then. We could not have forecast the kind of demand you mentioned in your opening comments that happened. It's been fantastic to see how dramatically the EV industry has emerged. But at the time, here's the thing about batteries actually. Unfortunately, unlike the world of semiconductors and computers and other parts of the digital ecosystem, there hasn't been a Moore's law. So while computing has increased at a rate of something like doubling every 2 years, batteries take about 20 years to double in energy density. So it's maybe only 3, 4, 5% per year. So the batteries that existed when we started the company, to be candid, are not that different from the ones that exist today. So even though it's taken us 10 plus years to get to where we are, the step function improvement that we're talking about is still compelling.
But the reason why there are substantially more electric vehicles on the road today is because even if the energy density doesn't have a Moore's law, battery prices have fallen kind of by the Moore's law principle. They're 90% down in a decade or a little more than that. This year is going to be the first year when average battery prices globally, they'll go up. And it's mainly because of metal prices. And so there's a lot of discussion now happening around lithium, around nickel. These are elements that your battery is likely going to need. You may be able to replace nickel, but not lithium. How are you seeing, where we need to go with scaling this industry to also managing the supply chain issues?
Yeah, this is a great question because supply chains are on the top of everybody's mind right now. So here's the thing. Our approach is to use a solid state separator or a solid state electrolyte, which eliminates the need for the anode. So if you look at the three components I mentioned at the beginning, in our technology, we don't need an anode, which means we don't need carbon, we don't need silicon, we don't even need to buy lithium for the anode. So that whole supply chain goes away. On the cathode, we are subject to the same supply chain constraints that everybody else is. However, we are cathode agnostic with our architecture. So we can switch from nickel to iron-based cathodes. And conventionally, iron-based cathodes have an energy density penalty, but when you couple iron-based cathodes with our lithium metal anode, you actually get a 50% increase. So now you can address the fundamental constraint that iron-based cathodes have. So you can now take iron-based cathodes and make them a viable alternative to nickel-based cathodes. And iron, of course, is one of the most abundant materials out there. And then finally, the separator that we build, which is a new element in the cell, this is a solid-state electrolyte, is based on precursors that already have large-scale commodity markets today. So we're not requiring any scarce materials that go into that separator. And those are typically non-battery materials, which means that they're not subject to the same kind of supply constraints that battery materials are. So when you put all that together, you have a system that actually is probably as robust as you can imagine against today's supply chain vagaries.
I'm going to ask another supply chain question, but I'm going to ask you guys to send in questions because towards the end of the conversation, you can ask Jagdeep questions too. So now, I wrote a story about the inside of the QuantumScape battery last year. And unfortunately, it was during COVID, so I couldn't travel. But we did have a photographer come to your factory. And the photographer was instructed to tweak the color composition of the separator, the main innovation that QuantumScape has. Now, we don't know what it's made of. Jagdeep wouldn't reveal it to anybody outside of the company. But there are materials that can do what your separator is supposed to do. And they involve elements that most people haven't heard of, lanthanum and zirconium. Now, those are supply chain issues those will come with as well, because most of those metals come from China. So have you thought through what is going to be required to actually scale the separator and the materials that will be needed for your battery?
We have. And as I mentioned, there are a number of precursor materials that go into our separator, but all of them have existing large commodity markets today. So there's already a supply chain established for those materials today. They're used in other industries. Yeah. And even at the, say, 20 gigawatt hour per year scale, we use a relatively small fraction of the existing market for those materials. And in fact, there are even greater known reserves for those materials. So we believe that because those materials aren't used in other types of batteries in any real quantity, we actually are not going to be competing for those materials with all the other battery factories that are being built in the world.
Right. Now, one other aspect of the battery industry, which is sort of a battery insider thing, but has an impact on how the battery industry scales, is secrecy. And last year when we spoke, there was a huge amount of attention on QuantumScape because there was a short seller who was claiming that, oh, the battery is not real. And then we had a conversation and you promised to have your battery tested by a third-party supplier, and you got it done. Now, what do the next milestones look like for you to A, make sure that the battery does what it needs to, and then B, the manufacturing of the battery, because it will go in a car by 2026, 27?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that there are people whose whole business models revolve around, publishing what we call short and distort reports and trying to drive stock prices down so they can make a buck, when there are people who have spent years, decades in our case, trying to, address fundamental science problems that impact climate. Many of the claims that were made in that short seller report, which was over a year ago, have already been debunked just by our own execution. They claimed we could never go from single layer cells to multi-layer cells. They claimed that the data wasn't replicable at high rates with high repeatability. We've published so much data since then that it's pretty clear that all that was just an attempt to manipulate the stock price. The more important thing, though, is that for our mission, when we first announced our product, we announced that we were capable of we had an architecture capable of 50% greater energy density that could charge in 15 minutes. Yeah. But it was in a single layer cell, which is one anode, one cathode, one separator. And our main task at the time was to make multi-layer cells, which is to stack those single layer cells up to make bigger cells. And since then, we've shown 4, 10, and now 16 layer cells. The 16 layer cells we have are over an amp hour in size. And to put that in context, the cells that were used by the original Tesla vehicles were 18650 cells that are on the order of a couple of maybe 3 to 4 amp hours. So we're already in the same general ballpark of the cells that are used in the Teslas, and we intend to keep layering up over the course of the rest of the year. And once we do that, we think it'll be very clear that the layering problem has been addressed. And the next key challenge for us really is to scale up production on the manufacturing side. So we've brought on board some fantastic people. The woman that runs our manufacturing operations, Gina McCarthy, ran manufacturing engineering at the Panasonic Gigafactory in Reno, which of course makes cells for the Tesla Model 3. So she's got an amazing background. There aren't that many people in North America, frankly, who have seen the insides of a world-class, super high volume battery factory. She's one of them. So we're lucky to be able to get her on board. But we've built, a great team of very talented, people that are both manufacturing experts and scientists. So we think over the course of the coming, year or two, it'll become clear that the approach that we have is scalable. The last point I'll make on that is that the reason for our confidence is because the fundamental manufacturing processes that we're using don't involve things like high vacuum deposition, like semiconductor manufacturing, or batch processing, which is not scalable. So we think that when you take an architecture that gives you high energy density and high power, couple it with materials that are readily available, that are earth abundant, and then finally add to that manufacturing processes that are inherently continuous flow and scalable. You have all the pieces to be able to build a disruptive battery.
So one more scaling question before we take questions from the audience. You're going to do something that an American battery startup has not done in the past decade. Now, the history of batteries is that they were invented in an Exxon research department, the lithium-ion battery that we know of in the 70s. And then, Exxon found more oil and moved away from batteries. But since then, we've had a number of other innovations that have come from America that have then been scaled up in China. What makes you think you could do it differently? Because China offers a cheap way of getting to making batteries.
It's a great question, and I think the only way to do it is to do it differently. Because if you try to take the approach that's already being done in Asia, and China, of course, is the most recent entrant, but let's face it, Japan and Korea have been there even longer than China has. So if almost all batteries today come out of Asia, right? China, Japan, and Korea. And they've been doing it for decades. China has been more recent, but Korea and Japan have been doing it for decades. So to expect to take the same fundamental approach that has been worked on by the Asian battery companies over a couple of decades, and they've ridden down the learning curve, for years and years, and be able to be competitive is just, it's a very tough business proposition, because even if you get everything right and build a really flawless manufacturing line, the best you can do is achieve parity, right? The only way for a domestic battery manufacturing industry to be built is to change the rules of the game and have a non-level playing field. And that's exactly what solid state does. The solid state approaches are not what are used by the existing giants in the battery space. And so there is an opportunity now for a new entrant to come in and build battery production in North America. Because for the incumbents to play in that space takes away the learning curve advantage that they already have.
Now, Meg, are there questions from the audience?
Yes. Has going public on balance hurt or help your progress? Could the access to private capital without public company distraction be a better route for companies doing work like yours?
There's certainly pros and cons to being public. On balance, in my view, it's no question. It's absolutely been a positive because we have had access to, just much greater pools of capital than I think are available in the private markets. We raised, I think, a total of, over $1 billion. I think 700 million or so in the original offering, another 400 or 500 in a follow-on. So well over $1 billion. Battery production is capital intensive. Building factories is not cheap. It's not like hiring two guys and they write some code in the garage and they're up and running, right? It takes capital, and being public gives you access to capital. Now it comes with some nuisance effects. There's short sellers and there's stock market fluctuations and so on. In the large scheme of things, those are sort of just minor costs compared to the benefit of access to the type of capital that we need. Tesla. I don't know how many tens of billions they've raised on the U.S. capital markets, but we have a great system. Companies that have promising disruptive technologies like Tesla are able to access the capital they need to grow. Without access to those tens of billions that Tesla raised, we wouldn't have a Tesla. We wouldn't have a $1 trillion car company that's revolutionizing the whole EV landscape. So I feel you need to have a certain level of intestinal fortitude to be a public company for sure. Especially being public coupled with internet and internet trolls is can create some a little bit of stress, but you have to put that aside and focus on what you can do now being public that you couldn't do as a private company. So the short answer is absolutely, we'll do it all over again.
Another one?
One more?
Yep.
Are there any future ideas on utility scale storage applications for solid state batteries, or is all research around EV applications right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in fact, we just announced earlier this year a partnership with Fluence, which is in fact a stationary storage leader. And the reason we did that is because the same core benefits that we're offering for the EV space, so greater energy density, greater power density, increased safety, lower cost, which is a key part of the overall equation, better lifetimes, resonate across all the big applications. There are three big applications for batteries, of course. There's EVs, which has been our primary focus. There's stationary storage, which might be an equally big market. I mean, these markets could be literally $500 billion per year each. And then there's of course, consumer electronics. And all those markets resonate with some subset of those same key 5 benefits that I mentioned: energy density, power density, cycle life, cost, and range.
Right. One more, or I have
one more. Calcium and magnesium batteries and recyclability. How recyclable are they?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Calcium battery, magnesium battery, and recyclability. Are there opportunities for non-lithium?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not an expert in non-lithium batteries. The magnesium batteries had the promise. Now, when you say magnesium batteries, you're talking about magnesium ion batteries. So the ion that's moving is not lithium anymore, it's magnesium. The potential of magnesium was that it carries 2 electrons per atom instead of 1 electron, so 2 charges instead of 1. The idea is every ion you move can move more charge and therefore store more energy. The problem, though, is that we haven't found good electrolytes, good anodes, good cathodes for magnesium ion. So the efforts that were started in the magnesium ion world really ended up not producing viable solutions. So I don't personally believe there's a real competitor to lithium out there. Lithium, for those of you that remember high school chemistry, lithium occupies a very unique position in the periodic table. It is the northwesternmost element on the table other than hydrogen. So it's the lightest element and it's the most electropositive element, which means it's the element that most wants to give away its electron, and it's the lightest. So you really can't find a more perfect element in the universe because our periodic table is the same table that Akshay has a PhD in chemistry, by the way, so he certainly knows this. But there's no other element that is as light and as electropositive as lithium, which makes it uniquely qualified to be the driver for batteries.
Now, one question you didn't answer was around recyclability, and we'll take that as the last question. Are you thinking about it as you're manufacturing your battery?
Yeah, recyclability is critically important. I think there's a couple of ways in which we think we help the recyclability angle. One is we don't have any carbon in our anodes, so there's nothing to recycle there at all. It's like not using the material is the best form of recyclability. And secondly, our separator, which is a ceramic material. Let me just put it this way: we start with that material as a powder, which we mix into a solvent to create a slurry that's coated onto a carrier, which is then processed, dried and processed to create the ceramic material. When we have a finished ceramic separator, we can literally take it up, and if you crush it up, you end up with the same powder that you started with. So you can literally just reuse it without having to extract the metals. So with a cathode, ordinarily, you first have to extract the nickel and manganese and cobalt, and then make a new cathode out of it. And that processing is expensive. Whereas with this kind of approach, you can go from the actual finished separator back to the initial material and make it work. So we think that those are key advantages that can help the circular economy for this type of battery.
Well, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Good luck with scaling.
Great to be here. Appreciate it.
Please welcome to the stage Hina Baluch of General Motors for a conversation with Bloomberg Green's Lauren Keel.
Hina, I love the title of our session, which is that an all-electric future must also be all-inclusive. And I'm sure everybody here is pretty familiar with GM's commitment to going all-electric, to transitioning to electric vehicles. But tell us about that second part. You guys are talking a lot about equitable climate action as a piece of your climate action plan. So what does that actually even mean?
Yeah, so I think equitable climate action work is something that I'm very, very passionate about at GM. And equitable climate action is this recognition of
what I would call vulnerability differential, knowing that all communities, all people, all races, all genders are not equally impacted by the changes in the climate, and then making an active investment into the communities to ensure that we are focused towards addressing the challenges that impact specific communities as a result of climate change. For General Motors, that has translated into the launch of our Equitable Climate Action Plan, which has 4 pillars. There's work of the future, so really focusing on how do we transition the workforce towards an equitable future. There is a focus on an all-electric future with affordability of the EVs. And then there is a focus on accessibility of the infrastructure. So making sure that we address the issues around charging deserts, anything, particularly in the communities where charging may not be as ubiquitous as in others. And then finally, and most importantly, I would say, is the Climate Equity Fund. It's a $50 million funding from General Motors that's focused on grassroots organizations that are at the front line of fighting climate change in the communities.
You bring up a really important point that's not every community is impacted the same by climate change. And it's often the communities who are not the biggest causes of this, or the people, the populations who are not being the biggest causes of this, who are seeing the biggest impact from this. So how are you guys thinking about that as you think about your Equitable Climate Action Plan?
Yeah, so I'm personally from Pakistan, which in the US or in the developed world you'd call the global south. And what we see is that the per capita income of developing countries, per capita income of a poorer household on the climate change is far less than the brunt that they have to bear when there is natural disaster, displacement, job issues and all that. So our plan is to focus on an all-electric, affordable and equitable future, which has, again, I would reemphasize, a focus on EV access, EV affordability, and specifically transition of the workforce. And I would remind some of the most recent examples from General Motors. Our partnership with Honda focuses on EV affordability. We have made big investments in Lake Orion, Michigan plant for EV, and then at Amtrak Factory Zero in Michigan, and then also at Spring Hill, Tennessee. So we are moving at a very fast pace towards an equitable transition to an all-electric future.
A lot of what you just said involves partnerships, because this is, you guys are making a major commitment here. You're taking on a major problem. It's obviously not something you can do alone. As large as General Motors is, you need partners along the way. Mm-hmm. So as you're thinking about how you find those partners, why are you thinking more of like a grassroots nature of that? What are you looking for in the partners that you're trying to bring to bear on this?
Yeah, I really think that the world is at a moment with the climate action where we should all be all hands on deck, is what I would call it. And I would also say that I see my work as a collage artist, right, in the climate field, where you have to bring policymakers and you have to bring technologists and you have to make corporations and you have to bring scientists, academia, all of that. And I would say an important part of that collage is the grassroots organizations, because they're in the communities, they understand the problems of the community, they're working in the advocacy, education, all of those aspects when it comes to climate change and climate resiliency. So I feel that it is firstly very important to recognize that. Secondly, in my experience of working in GM in this sector for the last maybe around 10-something years, I've learned that grassroots organizations are a lot of the times women-led, they're a lot of the time people of color-led, they're a lot of the time community-led. And ironically, but not surprisingly, they're also the least funded organizations. So I would say roughly around less than 1% of global funding goes towards grassroots organizations. So a big part of the $50 million funding that I mentioned before is going to go towards grassroots organizations from GN. And we started the program last year. We've already partnered with around 30 nonprofits across the US. I would want to mention 2 organizations that we've been working closely with. One is called Valley Can, and the focus of their work is towards training the future EV technicians. And we also partner with Rocky Mountain Institute to address the challenges of EV deserts, or EV charging deserts.
Has it been easy for you to find partners in this space, or is that a challenge?
I would say that it was a challenge specifically in the beginning, and I think it is a growing area. There is still, like I said, the funding is limited, which tremendously hinders the capacity building of these organizations, which tremendously hinders their ability to apply for grants or hire or do all the things that larger organizations are able to do. So I would say that, yes, it's a challenge, but I also think there is a lot of organizations that are doing a lot of work in this area. So it's a challenge, but then also it's our responsibility to make a change by building the capacity of these organizations.
What would make your job easier as you're thinking about how to be more equal and inclusive in your transition?
You know, I think it's not an easy job. I think anybody working in the climate space will tell you that it's extremely challenging. But I think I do want to induce some optimism here, particularly keeping in mind, I feel that for the first time, at least in my lifetime of 30-somethings-year-old, I'm not going to reveal my age here. Edit that part if I ended up saying that. But in my lifetime of 30 years, as far as, and in the last 10 or so years where I've focused on this area, I have realized that this is really the first time that we are kind of stepping away from this adaptive theory focus, right? Where we thought, oh, we could do anything, humanity could do anything to the planet, to themselves, to the species, and we will adapt. And we've realized that's not the case. There is a limitation of how much humanity can adapt. And I think that has led to sort of an urgency of action, and that has also led to people coming together. I do have a favorite Persian-American poet. He's a modern poet. His name is Kaveh Akbar. And he has a poetry which I'll recite a line of it in Farsi, and I will translate the essence. It talks about Maharchi badast dade bashim dast dadim, which means that whatever we could have given up, whatever we could have lost, we've lost. So there's that sort of thinking that we should have towards the climate and the planet, that whatever damage we could have done, we've done, and now it's time to change that. And
it's really beautiful.
Thank you. And Lauren, I would say that personally, I'm very Schopenhauerian, very skeptic. But more recently, I've been reading a lot of work from sci-fi work, which I recently learned is a subgenre of science fiction. And I've been reading a lot of work from Octavia Butler and Ursula Le Guin, and kind of thinking about in all of the pessimism and all of the challenges, there's definitely an opportunity to be cautiously optimistic.
We had a kickoff event last night with Bill McDonough, who you may know, and many of you may know, was the father of circularity. And one of the things he said was, we should be so excited that we get to do this work, that it's amazing that we get to tackle these challenges. What an exciting thing to be doing with our lives. Yeah. And so I would love to hear from you, what are you so excited about with work that you're doing around the EV transition, around equitable climate action? What gets you excited to wake up and work on this in the morning?
Yeah, I think the most incredible part of the work, I would probably mention two things that I already mentioned. I think the first thing is the opportunity to be able to be sort of the collage artist, to be even within the organization, right? Outside the organization also, but also within GM, working with policy, working with scientists, working with people across the company, and trying to influence positive change. And really being heartened to know that everybody in the company wants to do the right thing and wants to bring the right kind of change. So I think that really keeps me excited about the role. And like I said earlier, I think I really see a sea change here of everybody sort of really coming together and being very realistic about, yes, we do have a problem at hand. The adaptive theory mindset will not work, and now what can we do about it? So I think this idea of really identifying the problem and then being solution-oriented is what makes me very excited.
That's fantastic. I love the idea of thinking of yourself as a collage artist. I think everybody in this room probably can and should feel the same way about themselves. So Hannah, thank you so much. Thank you so much to General Motors for this wonderful spotlight.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Please welcome to the stage Kathy Zoe, CEO of EVgo, for a conversation with Bloomberg Green's Kyle Stock.
So we're going to talk about electric vehicles, but the cool thing about you that I always am fascinated by, if you bought an appliance in the past 15, 20 years, you should thank Kathy because she was one of the main architects of the Energy Star rating system that the EPA rolled out. So, fun fact.
Thanks, Kyle.
Can we do a show of hands? Who owns an electric vehicle? A few, not a lot. But EV adoption is going quickly. So 5% last quarter, doubled last year in the US.
Who's an enthusiast for EVs? There we go. There we go. Okay, can I ask one more question?
Yeah, go
I
for
know
it.
this is your interview.
No.
Like, how many people in the audience, be brave, have not ridden in an EV? A few. So most people have ridden in an EV. Okay, good to know. In this conference.
I was going to ask, you've been in the role about 5 years. Do you think the adoption you're seeing now, is it faster or slower than you would have thought when you took the job?
I think it's about what I would have expected. It's just a classic, it's a classic hockey stick, right? Like, right in the next 24 months, it's expected that we're going to have 50 new EV models. And when I started at EVgo, you could either do a Nissan Leaf or a BMW ID4, and that was it,
right.
Or Tesla. And now there's just so much choice. So whatever kind of car you want to drive or ride in or lease, you have a choice. Big, small, family, sports car, they're all becoming available.
Pickup truck.
Right. Dare I forget the urban cowboys, yes.
Right. And the Ukraine crisis, how much of a factor or a force do you think that is? Do you think it makes a difference now?
Well, I mean, you've seen the same data I have. Like, the most common Google search now in America is for EVs or something like that.
Yeah.
So it is it's a horrible, horrible crisis. But the unintended sort of benefit for electrification of transportation is that going EV is on many more people's minds. So that's a good thing for the climate.
And you mentioned hockey stick. Is it like, are we at a tipping point situation, or is it going to be more of a gradual?
Well, I think we have a supply chain. Look, we may have a near-term supply of EVs issue, but I think that'll be a 2022, maybe beginning in early into 2023 issue. The car company, there's not a car company that EVgo works with, and we work with everybody, or that I even know of, that's not electrifying.
Right.
I mean, we announced a couple of months ago a partnership with Toyota. And again, for a long time, the word was Toyota's just going to go fuel cell, that's it.
Yeah.
And Toyota was clearly planning for electrification, and they're now going very, very big. So, there's so many new car companies. It's not, and it's not just Tesla. It's Rivian, it's Lucid. Nikola's back on track. There's a whole bunch of other electric vehicle companies that are smaller, that are going to grow and be big behemoths. So it's all the $500 billion has been committed by those car companies to electrify. That is unstoppable.
Right. It's kind of sunk cost. It's a
It's
foregone
good investment
conclusion.
rather than,
Right.
I wouldn't call it a sunk cost, I call it a great investment.
Right. I did want to ask about supply, though. Ford has stopped taking orders for 2 of their super coveted EVs. They're among the most researched, most marked up vehicles in the country. You don't think battery will be a bottleneck in the next ongoing?
I don't. I think it could be a near-term limitation.
Yeah.
I think that every single car company that I talk to is thinking about lithium supply, and they're going upstream. And you can sort of harken back to maybe a century ago when the steel companies had to think about raw materials as well. I think all the car companies are thinking about raw materials. I think Elon Musk is thinking about raw materials. I think Mary Barra at GM is thinking about raw materials. They all know that it's really, really important, and they will make investments accordingly.
And in terms of allocation, do you think they're very serious about sending these vehicles outside of states with the zero emission mandate? Like, will we see them in the heartland?
You bet. I mean, EVgo we have a partnership, a $90 million partnership with General Motors to build across the country. And why? Because GM intends to sell EVs into their traditional marketplaces, which are the heartland. So we're absolutely going to see EVs everywhere. I mean, that's why we need to build the infrastructure to get out ahead of that.
Your decision making, let's talk about that. I ask you this every time. in the media, we like to talk about the chicken and egg analogy. Your folks talk about the hot dog and bun. Like, what's the best metaphor, and how do you plan your infrastructure? How far out and where? And
yeah, so what EVgo, our particular sweet spot is fast charging. And we've got the most expansive fast charging public retail network in the United States right now. Every single fast charging stall costs about $130,000.
You got 2,000 of those or so.
Yeah, between 1,700 and 1,800 right now. So that's $150,000. And so what we do is, it's a significant capital investment. 2,000 components in every single charger. It's a real construction project. Before we decide to build a new station, we have to run the math and make sure that that station is going to pencil on behalf of our shareholders.
Pencil when?
We underwrite the assets over about an 8 or 10 year life.
Okay.
Which is pretty conservative. They may last longer, but this is early days. So we do that. And we have proprietary models that tell us what is the use of those stations going to be over time. So we look we use the BNEF forecast on EV penetration. We overlay our own sort of down to the census block predictions about how much that asset's going to get used, how dense is the housing right in that area, because the more multi-unit dwellings you have, the more reliance on public fast charging you're going to need. Because like I live in an apartment in Santa Monica, I don't own my apartment, I don't have charging in my apartment. So I have to rely, when I'm in Santa Monica, I have to rely on away from home charging. So all of those factors, it's a regression model with 12 variables and machine learning and all those fancy things, but we use those tools to figure out, over the life of that asset, am I going to get a return that's acceptable, that meets my hurdles?
Yeah.
And one of the things that is really, really important in places where there aren't enough EVs yet is, like, General Motors is coming to the party and they're paying us essentially $30,000 per charging stall to build ahead of demand. The state of Virginia, we won the contract to build out fast charging in Virginia. That government program that was fueled by the Volkswagen Dieselgate settlement Appendix D, paid for 75% of that, which meant that we can go and build in places as a private company, or as a public company now, but we can go build in places where there aren't enough EVs yet, but we can get rid of that, we can eliminate that Gordian knot, that sense of, oh my gosh, I don't want to buy an EV if I don't see a charger in my grocery store parking lot. And EVgo loves to build chargers in your grocery store parking lot.
And you can spread the risk.
Yeah.
How much more forward can you pull the economics on that? Is it a 2-year thing, a 4-year thing?
Well, look, let me just give you the case example of California. California is the most advanced EV market in the United States. 60 plus, you may know the data better than me, 60 plus, 70% of EVs in America are being driven around California roads. EVgo is operating a profitable network in California right now, because there are enough EVs to simply support the investment in more charging infrastructure. That's also true now in, I think, Denver, Portland, and a few other places. That will become true in more places depending on what the penetration of the EVs is. And as I said, we have these sophisticated forecasting tools. But overlay on top of that, a $5 billion federal infrastructure program
over the next 5 years.
Over the next 5 years, whose aim is to make charging infrastructure ubiquitous, and that will get players like EVgo to be able to build in places where there aren't yet enough EVs to make your money back, absent that support.
Do you think about it from the flip side? I mean, part of the thinking with Tesla keeping the network in-house is it sells their cars. Like, how big is a market of folks who will buy an EV or seriously consider one just because they finally see a station on the route they drive all the time?
Well,
or is that something you can't even care about or worry about?
Oh, well, we care about it because we want our assets to get used, obviously. Yeah. But if the indications from the car makers are true, it matters a lot. I mean, when GM came to us, 2 years ago to cut this deal, they said, look, people care about price, they care about comfort, they care about range. We know they need to feel comfortable that with a couple hundred miles of range, they're still going to be able to charge conveniently. Therefore, we're going to invest in you, EVgo, to help build ahead of when that demand is, because we know we need that to sell cars.
Before the Hummer gets to the dealership.
This was before. We cut that deal beforehand. Similarly, the program with Toyota is that they're going to give away 1 year of unlimited charging on EVgo's network so that people feel comfortable buying the car.
Yeah.
So it is absolutely a part of the equation. If you're making EVs and you're mainstreaming EVs and you want them to become the product that everybody buys, that helping with the charging is a part of the equation.
Before our session, I pulled up your map and I pulled up Electrify America. It seems they're much more focused on transportation corridors and point-to-point stuff. Is that a fair assessment, for one? And is there any danger? Is there any, do you stay up at night worrying that you're missing some opportunities in the Dakotas where you have no stations, or Montana and Wyoming?
We look at every opportunity, but we always look at it through the lens of is it a good investment for our shareholders? Corridors to date have not made any financial sense at all. We could not make them pencil.
Anywhere.
And anywhere. Virtually anywhere. We've got the definition of a corridor, the Department of Transportation has an official definition of a corridor that's part of the NEVI infrastructure bill stuff. Yeah. But so we would have, there do also happen to be some, Los Angeles, you could say, is one big interstate highway because of the freeways. That has enough density, unfortunately, sometimes. But so for us, we haven't wanted to. The dynamics change with the federal infrastructure money that's coming, because again, that is focused for the first year at least only on corridors, right. And so the economics might change. So we're looking forward to participating in that and being able to extend our geographic footprint. Do you want me to talk a little bit about extend?
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Yeah. So another thing that we've added to our offering is there may be gas station chains in rural America where it doesn't make sense for us to own the asset because the utilization may be intermittent, but the gas station owner says, I want to broaden my product suite. So what EVgo is offering to do there is do the construction services, sell the equipment to the gas station operator, and then operate it for them as part of EVgo's network, which is best in country network, through under the banner EVgo Extend. It's almost like Intel Inside, but EVgo Extend. So you're part of the EVgo network and the service and the branding that comes with it, but we don't necessarily own the asset itself.
And you're also talking to rural utilities, development funds, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
It does seem like there's an in-between, though, between North Dakota and the Whole Foods of Los Angeles. Yeah. Like northern New England, you seem to have a lot of stations now. The Carolinas, is there kind of like a mixed use model?
Sure. It turns out that people, if you go to an urban center and you do a radius of a couple hundred miles outside of that to where grandma or your cousins might live or whatever, people will still drive that distance. So as there are more EVs, what we basically do is we develop models, what is going to make financial sense, because how much use is the asset going to get?
Yeah.
And so like what we're seeing in, say, down the spine of the United States, say from Wisconsin, Minneapolis, all the way down through, if you go straight down, is that Texas? I presume it is, because Texas is so big. But down those sort of verticals, those are going to be interesting geographies, and those are also geographies that GM's really interested in us building, and right. Toyota wants to be selling cars there. So the economics, it's a snowball, right? The snowball is, I think you asked at the beginning, are we at an inflection point? I certainly feel like we are. Yeah. Like the momentum is on our side. The snowball is rolling down the hill and getting bigger and bigger. And that's all good news.
We've talked about the red tape and the permitting process. I think you said 18 months on average.
It used to be.
From let's build one here to turning it on. And you want to get that down to 6 months. How hard does that make your job? Are there a bunch of places where you're just starting things off thinking in 18 months we might be totally ramped?
EVgo, we are able to construct a high, ultra-fast charging station with 4 to 6 to 8 stalls in a period of 4 to 8 weeks once we start digging. That's how long it takes us to do our piece of it. Yeah. But before we can actually start to dig, the landlord has to allow us to build it there. The landlord, because it's high power, the utility needs to add some more equipment to the site, and that requires an easement. So that is another part of the process. The utility has to approve the design because it's connecting to the grid. So all of that's pre-work. And the local government authority has to give us a permit, and sometimes they want to specify what kind of landscaping and plants go there. All of that takes time. And then at the tail end, before we're allowed to have an EV drive up to an EV go station and charge, the utility has to come and do a final inspection. So to go from the 4 to 8 weeks of construction to it used to be 18 months, it's now probably down to, on average, between 12 and 15, so it's getting better,
right.
Because the flywheel's starting to spin. It's all of those extra pieces around the outside. It's an ecosystem. You know, it takes a village to build a fast charging station.
But you are moving the needle on that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. We've established this initiative called Connect the Watts, which is basically a group of all of us industry players, local governments, utilities, site hosts that are landlords, equipment vendors. We bring everybody together and we share best practice, and it's fun because sometimes like New Jersey has a model ordinance which the local government has figured out how to streamline permitting for fast charging stations, right. Just like we did with solar probably 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
They're now doing it with fast charging. So the person who runs that program in New Jersey got onto one of our salons and was able to tell that story to the other local government authorities that were on the phone, like, oh, well, maybe we can do that. So EVgo's happy to sort of contribute this to the conversation because obviously it makes our job easier.
Get everyone talking about it.
Yeah.
We're out of time. I want to ask one last question though. Do you think charging is a non-issue for someone considering a car, or are they still preferential towards Tesla just because it has 15,000 cords around the country?
My job is to make them completely comfortable. I would say it's still a work in progress. I think what you want to do is think about what our research says is the number 1 criteria for EV drivers is there a fast charging station close to where I need to use it? Is it in a convenient place? I would say, you can look on PlugShare and you can see where all the chargers are, and like what are your favorite routes if you're going to go visit your in-laws? Are there chargers?
Yeah.
And if there are places where you think this would be a really good location, then drop us an email because we'd like to know that matters to you.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Kathy, Zoe, everyone.
Thanks.
We need to.
As I think you all can tell, it's time for lunch. Lunch is downstairs. For those of you who had pre-registered for the paper and packaging board briefing that we have, Sustainable Forest for a Sustainable Future, and the Investing in the Green Transformation breakout solution session we have, those are straight back. So you're just going to go that way. Please meet back in here at 1:45, and we will see everybody then. Thank you.